She remained tense though, for even though her brother was more relaxed than he had been and less prone to fits of violent anger, he was still Viserys. She needed to tread carefully. They sat in silence for a few minutes as he began to untangle her hair. She leaned back into it, enjoying the attention that Viserys was, for once, bestowing on her. Even the tugging did not detract from the joy and comfort she felt at that moment. "Brother," she said quietly, nerves seeping into her voice and making her sound more like a child than she had in years. "Yes, sweet sister," he said softly, his fingers moving through her hair. "There is something I must ask you." His hands tightened in her hair, then they relaxed and retreated. He pulled away from her and she felt him stand up. It took her a few moments to rise to her feet and face him, her belly now too big and unwieldy to be able to make the move as smoothly as she once might have. Once she faced him, she saw a flash of worry in his eyes alongside something darker, rage. She took a step back without meaning to, but he did not seem to notice. Then she steeled herself, straightened her back as much as she could, despite the desire to lean forward and take the weight off it, and said softly, "Know that if you hurt me, you will die tonight, brother. Either by my husband's hands, Ser Jorah's, or Lord Waters'." He took a step towards her, eyes flashing. She did not move. Behind her she heard Ser Jorah or Oren unsheathe their sword. "Why do you wish for the Iron Throne?" she asked quietly, eyes fixed on her brother's. He stared at her, eyes wide. Then he threw his head back and laughed. She flinched. "Because it is my birthright, sweet sister," he replied. "I am the last dragon. What if a child of Rhaegar's survived?" she whispered, desperately trying not to make it look like she was terrified of the answer. Viserys froze. His entire posture went rigid. Then he shook his head as though to dispel the thought, and his eyes went from sad to angry in half a second. "We are alone, sweet sister. Rhaegar is dead. Father is dead. Mother is dead. We are all that each other have," he said in a voice that was both soft and yet hard. There was a bite of steel to his voice that she had not heard in years, so different to his usual ravings, when he continued, "I am going to take back the Iron Throne and avenge our parents. I will bring fire and blood to those that wronged us. I will burn them all." She closed her eyes and then sighed. "You have no claim to the Iron Throne, brother. Rhaegar had a child with Lyanna Stark, and that child lives. He has lived safely in the north all these years, and he is going to claim the throne." She paused, hearing a gasp behind her. Clearly Ser Jorah had heard. "Aemon Targaryen at the wall has declared him true. That is why Oren is here, to take us home, to our family, not to help us take back the Iron Throne for you. When our nephew makes his move, he will have the support of the North and the Riverlands through his uncle's marriage to Lady Catelyn Tully. When my husband dies, for he will die, and soon, I leave this Khalasar. I will go to Westeros with Lord Waters and Ser Jorah, and I will give our nephew my support." She expected Viserys to fly off into a rage. To hit her or to scream at her. To call her a stupid whore. Yet, he did not. He stood there, swaying slightly on his feet, mouth partly open and eyes wide. She waited a few moments for him to speak. When it became clear he would not, she said in a whisper, "You have done awful things to me, brother. Were you anyone else, I would see you dead. But you are still my brother. Come with me. Come support our nephew." She paused, and then so quietly that she knew the men behind her would not hear her, she said, "You are all I have left. Mother is gone. Father is gone. Rhaegar is gone. Our nephew, he does not know me. But you know me. You are my brother. Come with me. Please. Do not leave me alone." ****. When Drogo fell from his horse the next day, she called for Mirai Masdew immediately, even as Ser Jorah advised her to flee. Next to her, Oren and Viserys were silent. Her brother had not spoken since the night before. He had stared at her, horrified, and then turned and walked away. Ser Jorah had thrown her a confused look and then followed hastily after Viserys. She had tried to talk to her brother throughout the day, but every word she had said was ignored. He seemed lost in his own world, unable or unwilling to engage with anyone or anything. Princess Oren murmured quietly. "We need to decide what to do." "We stay," she replied, eyes fixed on the woman who had come as called. She had made her decision. We make camp here. She watched as her orders were actioned and the slaves began to make her and Drogo's tent, and, once pitched, the Blood Riders took her husband inside. Next to her in his saddle, Viserys remained silent, eyes fixed on the horizon. She scrambled down from her horse to talk to the woman, dimly aware that she, perhaps, should have already dismounted when Drogo fell. He will die. She said quietly to Mirai Masdu. Is that your wish? She paused. Then, eventually, she inclined her head. She wanted to go home, and Oren was right. She was never going to be welcome in Westeros with the Dothraki at her back. The only way to go home now was as she left all those years ago, by being smuggled. Drogo would never let her go. His khalasar would never let her go. She needed the chaos of his death to make her move. In the hours that followed, Daenerys listened as Mirai Masdu proclaimed that she would save Khal Drogo and barked instructions and orders. She watched with bated breath as a fight broke out between some of Drogo's Blood Riders and Ser Jorah and Oren Waters. There was screaming and wailing in the background, and she could almost hear the heavy beat of her own blood pounding through her body, but she did not move. Mirai Masdu continued her chanting and Daenerys remained frozen outside the tent. She had ordered a death tonight. She was a killer. No better than her father. This was to be her time to run and flee in the chaos that would unfold. But she could not bring herself to move. She was frozen. She pulled away from her own thoughts and looked closely at Oren as staggered to her side, a wound in his side bleeding heavily. He batted away Doriaire as she moved forwards to help. A flesh wound, he muttered. Water, please. Then he turned away slightly to take the offered drink, his sword held loosely in one hand. Content that Oren would be okay, she turned her attention to Jorah and Kotho. The knight was bleeding profusely. The two drew closer to where Daenerys was standing. She watched, in horror, as Quotho kicked Jorah out of the way and loomed over her, his arakh raised high above her. Dany! A voice yelled. Then suddenly she was no longer standing. She was on her stomach on the ground. She screamed in agony as pain ripped through her belly. She could feel blood pooling down her legs. Another stab of pain made her scream more loudly. Above her, the pressure on her back, pinning her to the ground, subsided. Dany! Jorah and Oren were swearing. Horses were screaming. In the background, the chanting continued. Dany! She rolled over and gazed at the night sky. Her breath came short, she gasped and screamed again, but it was muffled this time. She could not breathe. Her stomach contracted. She could hear Mirai Masdu chanting inside the tent. It was for show. It was all for show. The woman was just sitting there, letting her husband die. She knew that. But the chanting scared her regardless. Arms wrapped underneath her and lifted her up. Oren cradled her to his chest. Princess! My son, she whimpered. She turned her gaze away from the sky towards the encampment. Fires were spreading everywhere. Horses continued to scream. She watched a dozen of the Dothraki rode into the distance. The tent Doriaire said loudly over the chaos around them. She tried to protest, for if they went inside they would see the truth of the mummer. She made to try and sit up in Oren's arms, but he tightened them around her. Your handmaids know, princess. They know, he said softly, his voice far more tender than it had been before. They know. They stand by your choice. She leaned back. A hand swept down the side of her face. She turned towards it. Viserys was there, his eyes wet with tears. He grasped one of her limp hands with his spare hand and walked alongside Oren as they entered the tent. She was placed gently on a table, she could feel the firmness of it under her. Around her she could hear Mirai Masdu arguing with Oren and Doriaire. Horses kept screaming. She could smell smoke and fire. She hacked out a cough and the move seemed to dislodge something inside her, for another stabbing pain ripped at her stomach and she felt more blood pool out of her and down her legs. She screamed again. Fix her! Viserys yelled loudly as he leaned over her. His eyes were frantic, nearly black in their anger and worry. Then Mirai Masdu was there. Guard the tent. Let no one enter, she said without a way from Daenerys. She heard rustling that told her people were leaving. I am not leaving her, Viserys hissed out when the woman tried to move him. Mirai Masdew flicked her gaze from Viserys to Daenerys. She couldn't move as another stab of pain ripped through her. Stay then. Be there for her, the woman said. She screamed again. Above her, Viserys moved to stand by her head. Dany, he murmured, his hand sweeping down the side of her face. Dany. Do not leave me alone. 298 AC, Jon Snow. The muscles at the base of her leg, under what he assumed would be her knee joint, were huge. Bigger than his thigh, if not both his thighs. The tops of her legs were even thicker. She was strong. Her tail was flicking irritably backwards and forwards as he circled around her. When he reached her side, she turned her neck around and shoved her snout into his chest. He grinned down at her as she gazed up at him with her milky white eyes. Impatient. She shoved him again and then craned her neck past him. He ran his hand down her neck and scratched the spot about halfway down that he knew she enjoyed. There was a brief rumble as he found the spot, then she moved back to gaze at him again. Okay, he murmured, taking the hint. She huffed out a snort and turned her neck back around. You are sure she will take my weight? He asked more loudly, unable to keep the nerves out of his voice. She would have taken you a moon ago, Hojan replied as he walked up. She grows fast, Jon. She is 8 moons now. She should still only just be the size of a dog. You need to ride her before she gets bigger. For the bond, I know, he replied. He turned slightly to cast a cautious eye over his friend, then he dropped his voice and said, You are sure? Yes. He nodded and turned around to face Winter again. Hojan had not yet been wrong. Winter huffed out another snort and dropped down, not that she needed to, given she was only slightly larger than a horse and he could have easily jumped onto her back between the spikes. He felt a smile spread over his face. Then, not looking back at Hojan, he carefully swung himself onto her back, taking care not to impale himself as he settled between the 2 rows. His legs hung awkwardly before he realized he could loop his legs around one spike and then rest his foot on the one below it. He grinned more widely. Eamon had been right, she was made for him. His hands gripped a spike in front of him each and he flapped out slightly, pressing his chest closer to her back, as she rose up. She let out a roar that echoed around the courtyard, then with one leap propelled them into the air. He resisted screaming when she dropped slightly. Terror rose in his chest as he worried that he was too heavy, and she couldn't cope. Then she flapped her wings again, the noise making a little crackle through the air, and they rose. With a few more beats of her wings, they rose until she was hovering at least 100 feet above the courtyard of Greywater Watch. There was a brief pause as he felt himself relaxing, his eyes moving around the land behind Greywater Watch. The neck was beautiful from this height, he could see nothing but trees, swamps, and animals. It was quiet with no birds in the sky, likely due to the threat posed by winter. He smiled and loosed his grip on the spikes and ran a hand tentatively down her neck. Immediately he knew he had made a mistake. Underneath him, Winter's whole body tensed. Then she loosed a roar so loud that in the distance, Jon could see birds scatter from the trees in terror. His eyes were still fixed on the birds in the distance as Winter shifted underneath him from where she had been maintaining a steady altitude, not moving but hovering over Greywater Watch, and dived. He yelled as she plummeted towards the ground. He wanted to close his eyes, but the speed at which she was descending made him too scared to do so. Then, abruptly, she leveled out and skimmed over the top of the battlements. He watched as the men stationed on the battlements threw themselves to the ground, despite the distance that Winter left between her claws and the tops of their head. He would not judge though, for he would likely have done the same thing. She beat her wings another half-dozen times as she circled widely around Greywater Watch, maintaining a steady height. He relaxed his grip again from where he had hastily grabbed her spikes in terror when she had dived, and ran a hand gently down her neck. He could feel her pleasure at both the move and having him with her. He did not think he needed to say the words to her, for their bond was so strong that he could feel what she wished to do and thought she could likewise feel his wishes and desires. But still, he called out, "Sna, I've straggled Lilligan." Below him, Winter let out another roar, although this one petered off a bit early with a high-pitched squeal. He could feel her displeasure through the bond at sounding so weak. She shook it off quickly though and launched them higher into the air with only a few flaps of her wings. He tightened his legs around her and gripped her spikes in front of him more tightly as she obliged and danced across the sky. **** When he landed several hours later, he made to dismount from her as he would a horse, but instead toppled off the side of her, landed on his back on the hard stone of the courtyard. He huffed out a breath, gazed up at the darkening sky and did not move. There was a brief pause and then Ho-Jun's head appeared above him even as the ground seemed to move under him. Then the boy smiled at him and held out a hand. He gazed blankly up at Ho-Jun's hand for a moment, then extended his own and let the smaller boy pull him up. "Your legs are bloody," Ho-Jun said once John was stood on his own feet again. He paused and then looked down at his legs. His eyes widened as he realized that Ho-Jun was right. A thin layer of blood seemed to coat his upper legs and, judging by the position, it was where he had been gripping Winter's scales with his legs. "Moira has gone to get a paste," the boy continued as though nothing was wrong. Then his eyes turned to look at Winter. "She looks tired." John cast his eyes over to his dragon. Winter was walking, unusually for her given her desire to pounce everywhere like a puppy, in a less than straight line towards the corner of the courtyard that she had claimed as her own. He watched as she finally seemed to decide she was far enough out of the way, then collapsed down, tucked her head under her tail and did not move. "She will be okay," he finally replied, knowing that he was right. He could still feel her joy and pleasure through their bond, although it was more muted now. "Will you go up again tomorrow?" He cast another look down at his legs. "I think so." Here a voice said sharply, and a hand shot into his vision. John smiled and grabbed the tub that was shoved at him without looking at the person who had given it to him. "Thank you, Moira." The girl huffed and then said in a more gentle voice, "You look happy." "I am happy." "No," Ho-Jun said. "She means you look happy." He turned to look at them, feeling his confusion spread across his face. Both of the Reed children stood there, looking at him with soft eyes and gentle smiles. "What do you mean?" "We mean, John, that you truly look happy. There is a joy in your eyes, and you seem relaxed," Moira said gently. "I am happy," he said softly, in a conciliatory tone of voice. He had been happy for moons. Moira gave him a smile that suggested she didn't believe him. "Shall we ask the servants to bring dinner out for you tonight?" He opened his mouth to say no, but a gentle snore interrupted him. He sighed and smiled, "Please, and a blanket." She grinned at him, "Of course." Later, once he had pushed the empty bowl and mug away from him and thrown the blanket over his legs, he realized what Moira had been trying to say. With Ghost curled up in a ball next to him and Winter spread out behind him with her head and tail wrapped around him to cocoon him and Ghost in her warmth, he was happy. Truly happy. It felt like he had a home, no, a family for the first time since he left Castle Black. Chapter 13, Life. Chapter Text. Chapter Summary, Daenerys learns that only death can pay for life. Notes, a few, where I have used language from the books. 298 AC, Daenerys Targaryen. She will wake. Cannot know that. She is a dragon. Viserys. Not hear it. She drifted in and out of consciousness. Whenever she was awake the world seemed to spin even with her eyes closed. She felt sick. In pain. Agony. She heard fragments of conversation but none of them told her what she really wanted to know. My son. Dragon. Princess. Awake. Dany. Hurts. She's awake. Something cool touched her lips and she opened her mouth instinctively. She swallowed the warm water as slowly as she could. Her throat felt dry, and she did not wish to choke. But she choked anyway, and someone hastily held her head forwards and a cloth was placed against her mouth to catch what she had spat out. Can you open your eyes, princess? Oren. She tried. It felt like they were sewed shut. But eventually she managed to lift her eyelids slightly to gaze from underneath her lashes up at the ceiling of the tent. Sunlight poured through the smoke hole in the roof of the tent and she flinched. Then a head obstructed her vision. Silver hair. Oren. No. Viserys. My son. She gasped out, lurching forwards towards her brother, although she soon sunk back, energy escaping her. Viserys gazed at her sadly and she felt her heart stutter for a moment. She shook it off. She would know. She would know if her child was dead. Viserys. She whispered. What is wrong? I thought you had died, Dany, he whispered. Then, suddenly she was being pulled fully upright and he was holding her against him in a way he had not done in years. Her head was tucked against where his heart beat inside his chest. She could feel it almost thudding against her and his tears were pouring thick and fast into her hair. He smelled like he had as a child, now just with an underlying smell of horse. She heaved in another gasp of air. He smelled like home. I thought you had died. He said again, more strongly this time. You cannot die. You cannot leave me. He continued to mutter orders and commands against the top of her head and seemed so unwilling to let her go and, eventually, she found herself hugging him back. His arms around her tightened when she did so. You cannot leave me. He whispered. I forbid it. She drew back to look at him. He struggled for a moment but eventually let her lean back. My son. He turned and called out imperiously to someone out of her line of sight, bring my nephew. His mother wishes to meet him. Then he turned back to look at her and said, in a gentle voice at odds with his actions over the last few years, he looks like a Targaryen. She froze, her own heart beating forcefully inside her chest, and met her brother's eyes. There was a hint of madness in them, the same madness she had seen every day since they were children and the same madness that had made him threaten her unborn babe more than once, but behind that, there was something else. Something softer. Something she truly had not seen in years. Then a voice cut through the silence that had settled between them and Oren said loudly, your son, princess. She pulled away from Viserys fully and carefully turned so that her legs were hanging over the side of the cot she was on. The blanket that had been draped over her fell away from her chest, but she ignored her nudity and instead held her arms out as her gaze fell on her son, tightly clutched to Oren's chest. Oren passed her son over to her quickly and then hastily replaced the blanket over her, a slight flush on his cheeks. She did not care about his embarrassment nor the blanket. She felt the breath catch in her throat as she looked at her son for the first time. He was perfect. With copper-colored skin that contrasted beautifully with his silver hair. As she gazed at him, he opened his eyes. Violet. Rhaego, she breathed. I will go and find the Magi, Viserys said after a lengthy pause. I want her to check you again. Then he strode and left the tent. She pressed another kiss to the top of her son's head and clutched him closer as her eyes followed Viserys as he left the tent. He is healthy, Oren said gently. My son or my brother? She replied bitterly. Then she winced at the bite in her voice. Apologies. Your son. And my brother. Truthfully, princess, I do not know, Oren replied gently. Her eyes met his over the top of her son's head and she gestured for him to sit next to the cot she was on. Tell me. I have truly never seen him like that, Princess, Oren began. Then he sighed and rubbed a hand across his face. Ever since I met you, he has been difficult. She smiled sadly. A polite way of describing it. Do not mince your words with me, my friend. There is no need. He grimaced. Your brother is sick, princess. I do not know if what plagues him is the same sickness that plagued your father, but he is not well, Oren began quietly, his eyes flicking to the entrance to the tent as though worried he might be overheard. I truly thought on a few occasions that he might hurt, if not kill, you. The way he reacted to the news of your nephew was odd. He has not mentioned it since you told him. I thought we would need to kill him when he found out that the Starks had kept a son of Rhaegar safe. But he has barely reacted. I do not know if that is because he is pretending, he does not know what he will do, or if he has already decided how he will respond and is biding his time. Yet, the strangest thing is how he reacted to the events last night. Did he hurt someone? She whispered, clutching her son to her chest more tightly. Oren shook his head forcefully. No one. He pushed you to safety and saved your life in the process, Ser Jorah, and I would not have gotten there in time. He saved you, princess. He refused to let anyone kill Quotho. He said it was your right to decide the man's fate. And when he was brought into this tent, he refused to leave, despite threats that he might do more harm than good. He threatened anyone who tried to reason with him. He said he would not be parted from you. He held your hand the entire time the Magi worked and, Since your son has been born, he has only left your side to check on him. She sucked in a breath. He has not threatened him. Oren shook his head. Fiercely protective. He has not let anyone other than Sajora, me, or a wet nurse near your son. He has demanded that Sajora or I are by your son's side at all times. She did not speak for a moment whilst she digested what Oren had said. Then she looked down at her son who had gone to sleep in her arms, his eyes screwed shut and a slither of drool hanging out of his mouth. Perfect. We will watch him, Princess Oren said quietly. Sajora and I will watch him all day and night if we must. We will alert you the second we believe he is a threat to your son, I promise. For some reason, it did not make her feel any better. She could not help but wonder, as Viserys, the same manic gleam in his eyes, re-entered the tent with the Magi, whether the events of the last day had simply bought her brother a few more moons of life rather than changed his fate. ****. I have made my decision, Mirai Mazda said to her later that day as they sat outside Daenerys' tent. Daenerys turned to look at the woman who had delivered her son. She looked older than she had done the days before, as though her life was gone from her. Her eyes seemed dead and sunken in her once full face, and her brow was furrowed. The Magi's face was gaunt, and her hair was lank. She looked sick. Daenerys turned away and brought her son closer to her again as she had done every time she felt threatened or worried in recent hours. What is your decision? I choose death. Daenerys sighed and cast her eyes around the remains of the Dothraki encampment. Only a few dozen remained. The rest had fled, for Akal who could not ride was Nokal. The only reason she was still here and not on her way to Ves Dothrak was because of the Magi whose magic had scared away the superstitious Dothraki. Whilst a part of her was glad over what happened, for it made it her next steps easier, another part of her felt sick. All those slaves, she could help them no more, not that she truly thought she could have helped before. But she had wanted to try. The only small mercy was that some had been close enough for the Blood Riders who stayed loyal to her, Jorah and Oren, to protect. I cannot change your mind? She asked eventually. The woman shook her head. I have seen the future, Daenerys Targaryen. I have seen yours and I have seen mine. My future holds only death, everything I will touch from now will only end one way, in death. I gave too much of myself to keep your son alive. I called on magics that should never be used, and the price was high. I will not heal another person again. And a healer that only brings death is not a healer. What would have happened to my son otherwise? Mirai's face twisted in a scowl and then she said, he would have died before he had lived. You saved him. You have offered me vengeance and you have offered me a future. Not many would. You wanted us to have a future and now some of us will, for your men did manage to save some of my flock, and so I have given you yours. You have treated me with respect and, even though you were late in saving me, you tried to do what others did not. She was silent for a while, digesting what the women had said. What do you see in my future? The woman paused for a moment and then murmured, life. And my brothers. Mirai Mazdu sighed. Life, for now. For now. She whispered. Her chest felt tight as though all the air had been sucked from her lungs. For years she had resigned herself to Viserys dying young, he was mad and the mad did not live long. Her father was proof of that. Sooner or later, she had known he was going to die, either because of her or for her. Recently, she had started to think it would be the former and that she would be the one to end his life, and then, more recently, she had begun to hope that he could be spared. That he was not so far gone. That he would not force her to make the choice. Then Oren had suggested there might be hope. And now, that had been snatched away again. For now, the woman replied, repeating her own words back at her. My hand. Cursed is the kinslayer. I do not know. She heaved out a sigh. Do you know how long? You do not wish to know. Enjoy the time you have left, for if you know when it is coming you will not cherish each moment as you should, Mirai Mazdu said quietly. But he will die. We all die eventually, princess. She nodded. It was as good an answer as she was going to get. How do you wish to die? The woman turned, her eyes bright as though reflecting the sun's energy. Your Lord Walters said that Targaryens of old were burned. That their dragons set them alight. That the dragon flame burned so hot and for so long that, once burnt out, nothing was left. That to be sent to the gods that way was considered the highest honor. It is true. I wish to be burned. I wish for you to set me in a pyre and to put your eggs with me. Why? I saved your son. I saved you, the woman said, her eyes fixed on Daenerys. What is that worth? She flinched. This is your price. The woman nodded, a life for a life. Only death can pay for life. Very well, she replied after a lengthy pause, pulling her son even closer to her so he was smushed up against her breasts. When? Tonight. She nodded, her eyes moving to the tent where Drogo rested. When will he die? You said it would be soon, but he still lives. Tonight. Only death can pay for life. A life for a life. Quotho. Only death can pay for life. The eggs. Yes. Asterisk asterisk. Quotho was tied to a large stake hammered into the ground on the edge of what remained of the Dothraki encampment. Rakero, Aggo and Jago had, reportedly, been alternating guarding the man who had once been a friend. The rope which tied his wrists together behind his back and wended its way up his body to loop around his neck was then fed to the stake in the ground. He could not sit down for the length of rope was not long enough and so had been forced to stand day, night and now day again whilst her Khalasar waited for her to wake. As she approached with Ser Jorah, Oren with Viserys and Rhaego back in her tent, she heard the furious Quotho shouting abuse at Rakero who was staring him down whilst he flipped his arrow over and over in his hands. A light sheen on sweat clung to Rakero and when he looked up as she approached, he stopped flicking his arrow and instead used one hand to wipe the sweat away from his forehead. Quotho was drenched, his clothes clung to him and he smelt. She curled her lip. You would have killed my child, she said softly as she approached. You would have killed me. He spat on the floor in front of her. You will die tonight, Quotho. I will watch you burn, and I will stand over you as you scream and beg for mercy and I will have my vengeance, she said quietly. And once you are naught but ash, and something good has come from your life, then the debt will have been paid. He screamed insults at her back as she turned and walked away. You mean to burn him alive? Ser Jorah asked, his voice thick and anguished. Do not be your father, princess. She did not even turn to look at him as she replied, only death can pay for life. When she was back by her tent, she went to open the tent flap but stopped instead by the entrance as her eyes fixed on the sight inside. Viserys was sat on one of the many cushions on the ground, his arms wrapped around her babe and his eyes bright with joy, not malice, as he spoke in a soft crooning voice that she had not heard in years. I did not like you at first. I hated you. Truly, I never hated anything more. You were but a means to an end. A reminder of how far my house had sunk that I must sell my sister to get home. I would have done anything to go home. I would have sold myself if that was the price. And then, you were here. I tried to hate you. The first time I held you in my arms after you nearly killed my sister, I wanted to hurl you over the edge of the cliffs behind us. I would have done it, I think. But I did not. It was your looks, I think. Yes. It was them. They saved you. I was going to kill you. Then you opened your eyes. They're not like Dany's. They're not like mine either. You have my mother's eyes. A darker shade of violet. Almond-shaped. Perfect. Targaryen eyes. She made to move forwards but stopped as Viserys pulled the baby closer to him until her son's neck was hovering over Viserys' shoulder. She was my mother. She died when your mother was born. Dany killed her and yet everyone loved Dany. Everyone. They forgave her for killing my mother. I could not forgive her. I cannot forgive her. I will never forgive her. I will hate her forever, I think. But I would never kill her. I could never. She is my sister. Mine. But if you had killed Dany. My sister. I would have killed you. She froze and for a moment felt faint. Then she remembered to breath. Viserys. She murmured. He wrenched his eyes away from the floor and gazed up at her. His eyes were bright and manic again, fixed on her and unblinking. Then a smile slid across his face, and he rose to his feet, crossed the tent, and handed her son into her open arms. When she looked at his face again, his eyes were soft and wet. Tears dripped down his cheek. ****. The land around their encampment was parched. The trees that remained were brittle and the grass brown. But it would be enough for a fire. Will he get a horse? She shook her head and turned to look at Rakuro, who stood next to her with his arak in hand. No. He should have one. She shook her head again. He does not need one and we cannot spare one. He did not argue and instead left her alone. She watched as Jago and Ago continued building the pyre. It needed to be big enough for 2 grown men and a woman. Rakuro came back with Khal Drogo's most valuable possessions, his great tent, his painted vests, his saddles and harness, the whip his father had given him when he came to manhood, and 2 other items. "Stop," she said to Rakuro. He froze and turned to look at her, perplexed. "Roigo. Roigo shall have his father's arak and his father's bow." "Just these?" She nodded. "He does not need the whip, for there is no slavery in Westeros. He does not need a tent, for one day he shall live in King's Landing. He does not need a horse's saddle or a harness, for he will take a dragon for his mount." "As you say, Khaleesi," he murmured, his eyes confused. He headed closer to the pyre and put the objects she did not want on the pyre where her husband would be placed. "The weapons that Khal Drogo gave you are likewise to be kept away from the pyre." "Princess." She turned slightly to glance at Oren. "You cannot mean to do this. Only death can pay for life." "But not your death," he whispered, his voice cracking. She leaned across the distance and touched his face. "I will be fine. We will be fine. We are dragons and fire cannot harm a dragon," she said. "You will understand." She shifted slightly on her feet as her legs began to ache and her back throbbed. She would not sit down though. She was not weak. "Why do you do this?" "It is not because you loved him," the man continued. "Because I must. You will die. We will be fine. Fire cannot harm a dragon. We will not die tonight, you have my word." "Swear it." "I swear it." He nodded and did not speak again. She turned back to the pyre, noting that the sun was beginning its descent. She called out to the Dothraki around her and watched as fewer than 100 people, amongst them her son, her brother and Ser Jorah, appeared. She had failed so many, but she would not fail again. "You stayed when you could have left. You have fought for your freedom when you could have surrendered. It is an honor that you stayed, and one I will not forget. Tonight, I offer you no promises. But tomorrow, when the smoke clears, I will not just make a promise, I will make a pledge. I will make a vow. Those that would stay, I will treat like family. Those that would leave, I say go." They stared at her, as though she was insane. But no one moved. She turned and headed back to her tent, the eyes of every man, woman, and child in the khalasar burning into her back. They were muttering, she could hear them, but she paid them no mind, for tonight she would show them who was truly the Khal of Khals. Her bath was near boiling with the steam rising from it, but she did not care. In the corner of her tent, her son was suckling at a wet nurse's teat. She glanced over at them as she slipped beneath the water. She closed her eyes and let Irai, Jiki and Dorie scrub her back and wash her hair. "Khaleesi," Dorie said eventually. She opened her eyes and glanced up at the girl. "Yes. Could we speak, privately?" She nodded and gestured for Irai and Jiki to leave. Dorie smiled weakly in thanks and then whispered so that the wet nurse in the corner of the room would not overhear, "He does not lay with me anymore." She rose from the tub and Dorie was quick to move to help her get out of the tub and help her dry. She fanned her even as Daenerys considered Dorie's statement. "Have you tried?" Dorie nodded, a flush creeping over her face. "He has not wished to bed me since we left Ves Dothrak. Is this not good news?" she asked gently. The girl flinched. "A whore who is not wanted is not needed. You will always be needed here, Dorie." "I will always need you," she replied, grasping the girl's hands in hers. "You need not be a bed slave if you do not wish to. If my brother does not wish to lay with you, then that is just more time you can spend with me, is it not? And if he does wish to bed me again? If you wish to bed him, then I will not stop you." If you do not wish to bed him, then tell me. The girl gave her a weak smile and then nodded. Once she was fully dried, she sent Doria and the wet nurse away so she could spend time with her son. She held him in her arms and hummed the lullaby she could remember Viserys crooning to her as a child. She looked into his violet eyes, the eyes that Viserys had said were like her mother's, and wondered what lay in store for his future. She gazed at the last of the sunlight trickling through the top of the tent and prayed that, soon, she would be home. The sun had almost set when she left the tent and instructed them to take her husband from his tent and put him on the pyre. The Dothraki watched in silence as Jago and Aggo bore him from the tent. She walked behind them, Rhaego in her arms, in silence. They laid his body down so that his head was toward the Mother of Mountains to the northeast. Well, she called out once he was settled amongst the blankets, cushions, logs, and grass that made up the pyre. She exchanged the jars for her babe who she passed carefully to Ser Jorah. Once she had the jars she carefully poured them over the pyre, soaking every inch of it in the fragrant oil. My eggs. There was a shriek that was cut off before it had properly begun. She ignored her brother and whoever had silenced him. My eggs. She called again. You could sell these, princess. Buy armies to escort you home or to live out your life in luxury. You need never go hungry again, Oren said as he appeared, her eggs in his arms. Life was not made to be sold just to please oneself, she replied. She clambered onto the pyre and carefully placed an egg by each stake and one by her husband. She placed the biggest, the black and red, by her husband. The gold and cream one she placed where the Magi would stand and the green where she would have Quotho tied. As she climbed down from the pyre she noticed that the Magi was stood nearby, her eyes moving between the eggs. A life for a life, the woman said. A life for a life, she replied. Him first, the Magi said after a momentary pause. Then tie me. I go because it is my time, but I will still scream and likely flail. I do not wish for your screams, she said quietly as she drew level with the women. Nor your death. She turned and watched dispassionately as Rakero and Aggo wrestled Quotho into the pyre and tied him there. Then she crossed back over, a jar of fresh oil in her hands, and stood on a piece of wood so that she might pour it over his head. She stepped back and watched as it dripped down his face and coated his body. You are mad. He yelled. I am a mother, she hissed. Then she turned and watched as Mirai Mazdu stepped onto the pyre. The women headed to the stake that was to be hers. Daenerys tied her herself, his eyes looking everywhere other than at the woman who had saved her son's life. When she stepped back, she finally drew her eyes up to meet Mirai's and said, in a voice barely above a whisper, he will know your name. He will know that you saved his life as you saved mine. He will grow up knowing that you are the reason he lives. I thank you, Mirai Mazdu, for all that you have done for me, for the lessons you have taught me and the gift you are giving me. It was a shock when the woman smiled at her. She had thought previous smiles were true, but this was different. There was a depth to it that made the woman seem softer, and Daenerys wondered for a moment if the woman had been a mother. It was the sort of smile a mother should have. You were made to be a queen, Daenerys Targaryen. And you will be. I thank you for the gift you are giving me. She nodded, doing her best to hide the surprise in her eyes, and said, I hope you find peace. Then she wrenched her eyes away from Mirai Mazdu and walked away. Together, she and her Khalasar gazed up into the sky, looking for the first star that could be seen in the growing night sky. Jago spied it first. She smiled as her eyes locked on the comet above. She took the offered torch from Aggo and thrust it into the logs. The fire took to the oil at once and flames grew within seconds to envelop the entire pyre. The two men and Mirai, in the middle of the pyre, were far enough from the heat and flames that it would take time for the fire to reach them. Around her people stepped back. She stepped back too and then called for her son. Once he was in her arms, she realized she could hear Viserys protesting. She turned to face her brother and said quietly, fire cannot harm a dragon, brother. Anguish flitted across his face, and he struggled more furiously against the grip that Oren had on his arms. Behind him, Oren's face was set with anger and worry. Dany. Do not do this, Dany. I forbid it. He yelled, his voice cracking. Dany, please. She paused and gave him one last small smile, then she turned back around. Her arms tightened around Rhaego, and she looked down into his eyes, her mother's eyes, and, without taking her eyes away, she stepped into the flames. Asterisk asterisk. Cracks and pops echoed around her, like thunder. But 3 were louder than the rest, and the noise they made reverberated around 4 minutes after they had first been made. She could hear the screams of frightened men, women, and horses alike, the cursing and screaming of Viserys loudest of all. She kept her eyes fixed on her sons throughout. The blanket her son had been swaddled in had long burnt away, and his beautiful silver gold hair was likewise gone. She knew that she was likewise naked and bald. But she did not care. Eventually, the fire died, and she rose from its ashes. She stood there, her son in her arms. The cream and gold dragon curled up around her arms, its head resting on her son's chest and its eyes fixed on him. The green and bronze dragon was climbing up her leg, its head resting against her. The black and red, the one she knew would be hers, was curled around her shoulders, his legs resting there, and its head held high as it gazed around at her khalasar. She tore her eyes away from her son and looked out at her khalasar. Princess Oren said. Then he dropped to his knees and bent his hand over his chest in a sign of fealty. Around him, men and women of the khalasar did likewise. Jago pushed his way to the front of the men in front of her. Blood of my blood, he murmured, pushing his face to the smoking earth. Asterisk. Rakaro and Ago did likewise. She stepped forwards, closer to them until they were prostrate at her feet. She turned her gaze past them to look at the men, women, and children, all of whom had dropped to their knees and were gazing at her son, in wonder. I said that if you stayed, I would make a pledge, a vow, to you. That I would treat you like family, she said, her voice carrying in the silence. Across the narrow sea, my nephew waits. He is blood of my blood. The true heir to the throne that Khal Drogo promised me, promised my son. The Iron Throne is not mine to take. It is not my son's to take. It is for my nephew to take. He is blood of my blood, and that means more than the Iron Throne ever could. So, this is my vow to you. My son and I are going to cross the narrow sea. We are going to help my nephew take back the Iron Throne. We are going to pledge our lives and our service to him. We are going to give our enemies what they deserve. House Targaryen is returning with fire and blood. Come with me. Come with my son. My son will be the first Dothraki to cross the poison water. Swear to him, to me, and come and take the Iron Throne with us for my nephew. She straightened her spine and, on her body, her dragons lifted their ears and screamed their approval. Their song playing through the air for all to hear. There was a brief silence, and then Rakaro rose from where he had been laying on the ground. You remain, blood of my blood, he said. Your son is blood of my blood. Then he turned to look at the Dothraki gathered behind him. I ride with the Khaleesi. She smiled as Ago and Jago proclaimed they would follow her and Rhaego across the narrow sea. We march today. She called out once silence had descended again. Gather all that you need. We march for Meereen. They dispersed to do her orders. Once when Viserys, Ser Jorah and Oren remained, did she feel her spirit leave her and let her shoulder hunch forwards. She was so tired. Against her breast, Rhaego let out a yawn and the cream dragon mirrored it and went back to sleep. She turned her attention to her brother. His eyes were wide, and he looked like he was ready to run to her. She froze, expecting the worst, and waited for him to speak. Slightly behind him and to either side of him, Oren and Ser Jorah rested their hands on the pommel of their swords, but he appeared not to notice. Dany Viserys breathed, his eyes fixed on her and not on the dragon that had leapt off her and was skittering towards him. Sister. His eyes swung around to look at the green and bronze dragon that was clambering up his leg, and then he wrenched his gaze away to look at her as it settled itself around his neck. You awoke the dragons. Interlude, 298 AC, Aemon, flashback. How did our ancestors bond with dragons, uncle? How does a dragon mate? You said that Jaehaerys and Alysanne's dragons lay together even decades after their riders died. Do dragons only mate with those that their humans have an affection for? Aemon's eyes fixed on the dragon that was laying on its back and merrily belching away, the remains of its dinner smoked on the floor next to it. As small as she was, it was nearly impossible to imagine her ever laying her own clutch of eggs or mating with another dragon, yet, somehow, he knew she would. I am not quite sure, nephew, he replied eventually. The books all say different things about the topic. So, we do not know. He shook his head sadly. But I can guess. Jon smiled at him. On Jon's lap Ghost let out a snuffle as he burrowed deeper into his nephew's warmth. Ghost opened an eye to gaze at Eamon as though expecting the upcoming conversation to be exceptionally entertaining. I think our ancestors bonded with dragons in various ways, he began. He paused as the dragon rolled onto her stomach and opened her eyes to watch him. Once she had stopped moving, he continued, they bonded in various ways, I believe. Dragons that hatched as babes, as yours has done, often bonded to the first Targaryen they saw. Were those bonds the strongest? Could a Targaryen who bonded with an adult dragon have the same sort of bond that I do with mine? As I was saying, he responded gently, unable to stop the small smile that was spreading across his face. Dragons that hatched as babe, as yours has done, often bonded to the first Targaryen they saw. Those bonds were not necessarily any stronger than a bond that was established later, such as the bond between Caraxes and Daemon, which was established when Caraxes was already an adult. But a bond is a bond, nephew. Remember what happened to Dremfyr after Helena died. So, she might take a rider after me. She might. But she might not. But she might not, he repeated. Do you want her to? Jon paused, his eyes moving from Eamon to his dragon who, seeming to sense his eyes on her, turned to gaze at Jon. Eventually Jon ripped his eyes away from the dragon and murmured, I don't want her to be alone. He nodded. So why do you ask? I don't want to raise her, to share my life with her and live with her, possibly for as long as you have lived, if I am lucky, uncle, and then leave her alone when she still has another 100 years left, Jon said quietly. Truly, I cannot think of anything worse. She will be fine, he said gently. We have spoken of this already. You will likely marry one day and have children. Viserys and Daenerys are still out there, they will have children of their own, one day. The chances of her being alone are small. Jon digested his words for a few moments and did not speak. Then he leaned forwards and held out his hand. Eamon watched as the dragon scampered across the floor onto Jon's hand and let him pick her up and cuddle her close to his chest. On Jon's lap, Ghost shifted his head to gaze up at them. And mating. Ah, now that is an interesting one, he continued. You are right, some dragons do seem to mate for life, as it were. We also know that, sometimes, dragons will mate with the dragon that is bonded to their rider's lover, as was the case with Jaehaerys and his queen. The question is this because of the riders themselves or because the riders are similar to their dragons, with the same characteristics, and dragons or riders are extensions of each other? Jon blinked at him. Extensions. He paused, thinking over his next words carefully. Did Alysanne and Jaehaerys' dragons mate and lay together because their riders, Alysanne and Jaehaerys, lay together? Or did they lay together for the same reason that their humans did, because Silverwing and Vermithor found characteristics in each other than their riders had also found in each other? You think that a dragon and its rider share characteristics? Personality? I do. That sounds crazy. And yet, you think I am right? Jon blinked up at him, his fingers running down the spikes on the dragon. It is strange, but I cannot imagine her mating with a dragon who was cruel. Can dragons be cruel? Like any intelligent animal, I think dragons can have any personality trait. They can be good. They can be kind. They can be cruel. More than that, they feel emotion as we do. As a direwolf does. Look at what your dragon has shown you so far. She has shown you love and trust, fury and compassion. Jon nodded as though it made sense. Yes, I can see that, he murmured. He turned his attention to the dragon and continued, I cannot imagine you having children with a dragon that was not your equal. They would need to be as fierce as you. As strong as you. As brave as you. As intelligent as you. You would want and deserve someone who was your equal in every way, wouldn't you? Eamon watched as the dragon cocked her head to one side and then seemed to purr at Jon before it let out a longer croon and nuzzled its head into Jon's chest. I think, perhaps, she is saying that she expects the same for you, he said gently. Chapter 14, Brother. Chapter text. Summary, Eamon and Arya discuss family. Sansa proves that she spent enough time in King's Landing to understand how one might play the Game of Thrones. Oberyn saves 2 lives. Daenerys tries to reason with Viserys. Notes, so sorry for the delay, again. I hope the length makes up for the wait. For those of you also reading Perennial, I hope to have the next chapter of that up next weekend at the latest. 298 AC, Aemon Targaryen. What did your brother do then? Arya breathed. He hid a smile. She was sitting on the edge of her chair, mouth open and eyes wide. Benjen's description of the girl over the last few years had not done her justice. She was all wolf and more. Despite that, she appeared to enjoy nothing more than hearing about Targaryens of old and, of course, who better to tell her stories and occupy her mind than, as she called it, an actual Targaryen. He had caught the little Stark staring at him several times over the last few weeks, sometimes in confusion, with her brow furrowed and chewing on her lip, and sometimes in awe as though she could not believe he was a real Targaryen. He told me, he replied, a smile on his lips and laughter in his voice. And I told my mother and father. He tattled. He hid a smile at the fact the little Stark seemed more annoyed that the future king had snitched than his older brother. Wouldn't you if Bran tried to slip you a love potion? She made a noise halfway between pretending to be sick and laughter. I would like to see him try. He smiled genially at her. It did not work, of course. She nodded vigorously at him. Aegon V married Bertha Blackwood. A love match, he agreed. She paused and her eyes moved from him to the window by the door as though hoping to tell if there was anybody listening in, like she had all those weeks before. Why was he able to marry for love? He was a prince. Mother always said I would need to marry to strengthen the North, and I'm not even a princess. He was a 4th son. As my father was. 4th sons, they get a lot more freedom than the firstborn, or the secondborn, or even the thirdborn, he replied gently. The more sons a father has, the more relaxed he is because his dynasty is secure. My father had 4 sons and 2 daughters, and so Egg often did as he wished. He got to live a life that very few nobility do. Do you think he was happy? He was very happy. Were your brothers and sisters? No, I do not think so, he said quietly. I think Egg was the happiest of us and the best of us. Do you think he made a better king that your brothers would have? Than you would have? He inclined his head, his eyes fixed on her. I do. There was a long pause and silence settled over the two of them. He cocked his head slightly, watching her. She was worrying on her lip again and fiddling with her shirt. They were her tells, they always gave away that she was about to say something that she thought she might be scolded for. You would have made a good king, Maester Aemon, she said eventually, her voice quiet and slightly unsure. He gave her a benign smile. What makes you say that, little Stark? You're intelligent. You're kind. You're funny. You're not hot-headed like me, she said, her voice trailing away at the end. I think you would have been as good a king as your brother. Ah, he replied after a brief pause. I think that the qualities you list in me that you think would have made me a good king would actually have served to make me a bad one. How so? Well, my intelligence would have meant I would have little patience for ruling. I like to keep my mind sharp and read. Truly, it is my passion. A king who reads, like my uncle did, risks letting the realm collapse into ruin or, according to my mother, forget to change out of his night clothes before he attended feasts, he replied. There was a small giggle, then he continued, my kindness would have made me soft, I would not have wanted to make difficult decisions and cause people pain. I have hardened with the years, as all men do, but back then I was naive and, if I am truly honest, weak. My humor, well, what use is humor for a king? And my lack of impulse would have served me well when it came to making decisions, but it may have also caused me to act too slowly. What does make a good king then? Arya replied, confusion in her voice. A good heart, but an understanding of how the world works. A king or queen must be kind and care for their people, the nobility and small folk alike, whilst recognizing there is only so much that can be done for anyone, and sometimes difficult choices must be made. Then they must have the ability to make a decision and stick to it, not try to find better solutions to lessen suffering and thereby make the situation worse by delaying. They must accept that they cannot please everyone, and they must be decisive and know when to be firm, but also be willing to compromise, when necessary, he said softly. Then he sighed and continued, they must be a good fighter, or at least be willing to try. A king or queen who cannot fight on the battlefield with their men is one who cannot rule. A king and queen must command respect, and there are truly only two ways that is earned, on the field or battle or through time, and kings and queens do not have the gift of time when it comes to ruling. They must be intelligent enough to avoid manipulation, but not so fond of books that they forget to live. They must love their family. Arya was silent for a long time. He could see her shifting again, fiddling with her shirt, and chewing on her lip. Jon would make a good king, she said eventually, her voice barely above a whisper. He understands people and he's not afraid to make hard decisions. He is a good fighter. He is kind. He is intelligent, although he tried to hide it. And he loves his family. No, he said quietly. He will make a magnificent king. She glanced up at him, eyes wide. You've never said that before. You have only been here a little over a moon, he replied. Besides, had you not already guessed? She nodded. Hearing it is different though. He smiled gently at her. You are incredibly intelligent, little Stark. You should not doubt yourself. She smiled brightly up at him and swung her legs backwards and forwards, so her feet were scuffing the ground. Her posture straightened slightly as she turned her head away from his to gaze up at the ceiling of his room. They settled into silence. As he watched, Arya seemed to be considering something carefully. Her eyes were fixed on the same spot on the ceiling, and she was chewing on her bottom lip. Then she stopped chewing on her lip and mouth opened, and she seemed to speak under her breath to herself too quietly for him to hear. Sansa can't marry Joffrey, she said eventually. Father will have to come home. She is already home, he said quietly. A raven arrived this morning. Your sister and father are back in Winterfell. He has requested that you go home. But Uncle Benjen isn't back yet. He should be back soon, and I can't leave until he returns, she said quietly. I want to say goodbye. He glanced at her. She was looking at him with an odd expression on her face. He hid a smile. Try as she might, she was incredibly transparent, and said in a gentle voice, and this has nothing to do with being worried about seeing Sansa again. She shook her head vigorously. She will be pleased to see you, he said more gently. She is your sister. There is nothing you could do and nothing you could say that she could not forgive. And likewise, nothing you could do or say that she could not forgive. She was quiet for a moment and then said in an undertone, when you dream of dragons, Maester Aemon, does it feel real? He inclined his head. It does. But then Targaryens have had prophetic dreams for centuries, so dreams may well be real. They may not. Old Nan used to tell us stories of how the Starks of old could see through the eyes of creatures. There are said to be men beyond the wall who can do it too. Wargs, he replied. An unusual skill, but one that has been well documented in many of the books I have read. Targaryens are not wargs though. Our relationship is just with dragons, and our dreams can be about everything and anything. I dream of Sansa sometimes, Arya whispered quietly. Warging? I think so, she whispered even more quietly. Her face flushed in embarrassment as she continued, sometimes I taste blood in my mouth when I wake up. I dream and see Shaggy Dog, Summer and Grey Wind running with me through the Godswood. I lay next to Sansa at night, and she whispers how sorry she is and how she wishes I would come home. You think you are warging into Nymeria? She nodded. In my dreams, Sansa calls me Nymeria but speaks of me, Arya, and says she hopes I will come home soon, she said, her face flushing more in embarrassment. He did not speak for a moment as he looked at her. Gods, she was so young. Feisty and sharp as it was easy to forget she was not yet a woman. Still a child. He smiled softly at her when she met his gaze and said gently, to be a warg, it is a gift, Arya Stark. Do not squander it and do not be ashamed of it. 298 AC, Robb Stark. His father looked old. Robb was not as smart as his mother, or, he was beginning to realize, Sansa, but he was not a fool. He had known when his father returned north that something was very wrong. When his father had told him about the royal children, he had known that was not the full story, but it was still more than his father had ever told him before, and so he accepted it. But, in his father's solo with Maester Luwin, Sansa and Howland Reed, he thought that whatever his father had told him was nothing compared to the weight that the man still clearly felt he was carrying alone. His father did, truly, look awful. His eyes were more sunken in, He had lost weight even since his return home, and his usually well-kept beard was scraggy. His eyes had lost a bit of their spark as well, and although he looked far from a living corpse, he was closer to it than Rob had ever seen before. That his father had asked to speak to them in the dead of night, the hour of the wolf to be precise, did not bode well. That he wanted them to meet in his solar and had asked the guards to stay at the end of the corridor, well, it put Rob on edge. Rob met Sansa's eyes next to him and she shook her head slightly. Clearly, she had no idea what this was about either. He cast his eyes around the room, taking in the pallor of Maester Luwin, the crackling fire, which was their only source of light, and the slightly messy desk where a huge map of Westeros rested. They were seated by the fire, Rob and Sansa on one side, Maester Luwin in the middle facing the flames and his father and Howland Reed on the other side of the fireplace. In the middle of the group was a large table with several mugs of ale, although Sansa had claimed one of water instead, a large spare jug of ale and a large jug of water. No one had yet touched any of the drinks. "I would ask that you listen to what I have to say," his father eventually began, his voice quiet, barely above a whisper. "I have made many mistakes. Mistakes that will haunt me until my dying day. But they are mistakes made to try and save my family. They were not made through any other reason." He paused and then said again, "Your word. I want your word that what we will speak of will not leave this room, at least until the time is right, and that you will listen to what I have to say before you pass judgment." "You have my word," Father Sansa said, nearly speaking over the top of their father in her haste to get the words out. "You have my word," Maester Luwin said. "You have my word, Father," he said eventually when all eyes had swung to him. Opposite Rob, Howland Reed made to open his mouth, but his father cut across the man before he could speak. "You need not give your word, Howland. You have kept this secret for 6 and 10 years. I trust you more than any other man alive." Rob cast his eyes between Howland Reed, who met his gaze head-on with a small smile on his lips. A gust of wind whipped through the partially open window and the papers on the table moved slightly. Rob glanced away from Howland Reed towards them, then turned away back to his father. 6 and 10 years ago, I came home from the war with the babe of a woman who was not your mother," his father said quietly. "To the world, the babe was my bastard. He was raised as such, alongside his siblings, and he has borne the stain of being my bastard ever since. Jon, your brother, is not my child. But he is my blood, and he is my son. His mother was my sister, Lyanna Stark, and his father was Rhaegar Targaryen. I have raised him, loved him, protected him, and lied for 6 and 10 years for him. For you all. To keep you safe." There was a long silence. Next to him, Sansa's hands clenched on the arms of her chair and her face turned white. Her mouth opened but she did not speak. Maester Luwin had closed his eyes and tilted his head back to the ceiling as though unable to bear to look at the group. He met his father's eyes across the small table separating them, desperately begging his father to say it was not true. But his father just met his gaze head-on with sad eyes and a firm mouth. He turned away from the group, hunching over in his chair to gaze behind him. He choked and felt a spittle of sick slip out of his mouth. He gave another choked cough and another spittle slipped out. He wiped his hand on the back of his mouth. "Gods!" He turned back to look at his father. Then his eyes slipped past him to the desk where a crude drawing of a dire wolf had slipped towards the edge and was hanging precariously over the edge and covering half the map. "Rickon." He paused. "You did not leave King's Landing simply because the king wanted assassins to be sent after Daenerys Targaryen," he said, realization blooming through him. "You left because you could not be party to the murder of Jon's aunt and cousin. To the murder of family." His father inclined his head. "Does Jon know?" Luwin asked, his voice quiet. "We sent him to the wall, Ned. The only child of Lyanna at the wall. He knows." Rob sighed and ran a hand down his face, horror blossoming through him. "Is he still there?" "He is not." "Why not?" His father exchanged a long look with Howland Reed. "Aemon Targaryen, the brother of King Aegon V Targaryen, is at the wall. He is the Maester, and he recognized Jon. He told Jon about his parentage before Jon swore himself to the Night's Watch. Jon left Castle Black over 6 moons ago." "Where is my brother?" he asked, trying to keep his voice calm and not angry. Judging by his father's expression, he had failed. He is with my family, Howland Reed replied quietly. He is in Greywater Watch and he is safe. Ghost is with him. He felt himself relax, slightly. There was a long pause whilst he and Sangza digested what was said. He met her eyes and was surprised to see how angry she looked. She had never cared for John. Of all his siblings, Rob knew that Sangza cared for John the least. She had never been cruel, but she had ignored him. He was a bastard. Beneath her. She turned her eyes away from his and glanced at their father, her lip curling slightly as she regarded him. Would you have left him there? If the maester had not recognized him? Sangza asked, her voice soft but an air of tension. Would you have left our brother to die at the wall, never knowing who his mother was? Yes. He flinched. Sangza did likewise. How could you? She whispered. Rob resisted the urge to ask Sangza why she was so angry. She had never cared for John. Was it the fact he had a claim to the throne, and she had spent years ignoring him, that upset her? Or the fact she had been lied to? As he watched, Sangza drew herself up in her chair and leaned forwards across the table to where their father sat. I have been spoilt and cruel, father. We have agreed on that. I have acted poorly, and I have treated my sister awfully. I have treated John like he was nothing. I have been awful, she said quietly. What I did to Arya, to Mika, what happened to Lady. It will haunt me until my dying day. I will never forgive myself. I was a silly little girl. A child. But that is not an excuse. I have no excuse. You, however. You are not a silly little child. You have even less of an excuse. You are our father. You sent our brother to the wall without telling him who he was. He could have gone to his aunt and uncle if you did not wish him here. You were willing to let him die there, never knowing the truth. How could you? He was not entirely sure what reaction he expected from his father, but the one he got was not what he had expected. I did what I thought was right, Sangza, his father replied quietly, his voice cracking. Do you know what Robert said, all those years ago, when he was presented with the dead bodies of John's brother and sister? Sangza shook her head furiously and Rob flinched again. He knew what had been said. He had heard Lewin and father discussing it once, a long time ago, when they thought everyone was eating the evening meal. He had thought it awful, and he had, of course, not realized that it was John's own brother and sister it had been said about. The thought made him sick now. I see no babes, only dragon spawn, he said quietly, when father did not speak straight away. Father's eye flashed to him, and he met them head on. Eventually, his father looked back to Sangza and said, Rhaenys was stabbed 100 times. Aegon was thrown against the wall. Elia Martell was raped, and her head smashed in. Do you know why? Because they were Targaryens, Sangza. So, tell me, what would you have done if you were me? What measures would you have taken to keep your nephew who had a Targaryen father safe? What lies would you have told? Sangza's face had grown paler the longer their father spoke for. She looked down at the table for a long time and then looked up again, tears in her eyes. I am sorry, father. I did not tell John before he swore himself to the Night's Watch, because I was worried about what would happen if I did. I thought he might wish for revenge and bring a war to Westeros that we could not win, for even if the Riverlands did join us, Dorne never would, and nor would the Reach. We would stand alone. And we would die. Make no mistake, if John had asked for me to fight for him, then I would have. I would have tried to talk him down, but if he had wanted war, I would have gone to war for him. He is my son. Your brother. But I wanted to avoid it. He was so young, and then he chose the wall, and I thought it would be better if he never knew, and so the problem was solved, father said quietly. Then he ran his hand down his face and murmured, the lies I have told, the secrets I have kept, I did it to keep John safe. To keep you all safe. I was selfish. The problem was solved, Sangza parried back, her voice brittle. You misjudged John, father, he said after a brief pause. He would never long for war. He just wanted a family. You should have told him. You should have given him the choice. They were silent for a long time after that. Sangza kept her eyes fixed on the table whilst she chewed her bottom lip furiously. Her brows were furrowed, and she seemed torn between anger and sadness. Maester Lewin appeared calm, but Rob knew him well enough to know the Maester had been rocked by the revelations and was deeply uncomfortable. There was a tension to his mouth that spoke of repressed frustration. Howland Reed looked calm, although sad and a touch nervous. His father likewise. Rob squinted slightly at them. There was something they weren't saying. There is something else, he said quietly. The fact he knows who his mother was and is in Greywater Watch, you still would not be telling us unless something has happened. He paused, horror crashing through him. John means to press his claim. I cannot believe it. Sansa is right, John just wanted family. He would not go to war unless there was no choice. His father exchanged a long glance with Howland Reed and then shook his head. Then, he leaned back in his chair and ran his hand down his face again, and Rob was struck again by just how old his father looked. No. Your brother does not mean to press his claim, he wants to wait. He has told Howland he is happy in Greywater Watch, he does not plan to leave for a while, father said eventually. You were right. I misjudged him, I assumed he would do what I would do. What I did. But he is not me. He is so much better than me. You mean to press his claim? Sansa said softly. That is the only reason you would be telling us if John does not wish to act. As Rob watched, she froze and then leaned further forwards in her seat. Something has happened, and you think John must take the throne. Across from them, father sighed and closed his eyes. The tension seemed to leave his body then return 100-fold in the space of a second. For a brief moment, Rob felt a swell of pity for him. Then anger returned. I received a raven 2 weeks ago. Your mother has kidnapped Tyrion Lannister and has taken him to the Eyrie for a trial, I believe because she thinks that Tyrion is responsible for the attack against Bran. Tywin Lannister has set his dogs loose on the Riverlands, and even now it burns. Robert has done nothing but demand I head south to sort your mother out. Mother was foolish, Sansa said quietly. She was not thinking, and she has brought this on herself, but this does not necessitate a war, surely. I agree, he said, before his father could reply to Sansa. We cannot march to war just because the king has demanded father rein mother in, and not just because the Riverlands burns. The lords of the north would never march south for that reason. So, there is another reason, isn't there, father? You would not be thinking of this if something else had not happened. His father and Howland Reed exchanged another long look. Rob watched them carefully. They looked less pale now, as though the worst part was over. Eventually, his father reached into his cloak pocket and pulled out a scroll which he passed over to Rob first. He kept his eyes on his father as he unrolled it and read it quickly. The king is dead. Joffrey sits on the throne. Do not look back. If you do, do not ride alone. Who sent it? He asked as he handed the note to Sansa. His father exchanged another long look with Howland Reed. Lord Varys. He felt his eyebrows raise. You are sure? The spider told me to leave King's Landing at the first opportunity and to not look back. Then he gave me an opportunity not a few hours later so I could leave. You left that day. I did. The second half of the note, Sansa said quietly, her hands white as they grasped the note. If you go south you will end up like grandfather and Uncle Brandon. He snapped his head from Sansa to stare at their father. Father looked pale again but, eventually, inclined his head and said quietly, I believe so. Joffrey cannot be allowed to be king, Sansa said quietly, her voice nearly eclipsed by the crackling fire behind them. He is cruel and mad. He enjoys the suffering of others. The lords will not march south just because Joffrey is a cunt, Rob replied. They will not march south for mother because she is not a northerner, and they will not ride south against a king whose actions and decisions have no real impact on us. At best, we should expect them to want to declare independence. Across the table, father sighed and leaned back in his chair to stare into the flames. I will have to go south, regardless. I must swear the north to the new king. If I do not come south, then they will come north. If we are lucky then I will be declared a traitor and, given I believe Cersei suspected that I knew of the nature of Joffrey and the other children's birth, likely lose my head. You've just said Sansa is right, and if you go south, you will likely die. Now you think that if you let them come north, you will likely die. His father looked at him and sighed again. So, what do I do? I already know what I must do, the path I think we must take. But I would hear your thoughts. Father, Sangza said quietly. If you have decided, why do you want our thoughts? He glanced at Sangza and then back to their father, who looked increasingly tired in the flickering firelight. Oh. You want my thoughts because I will be riding south to war with you. If you fall on the battlefield, I will be the warden of the north and leading the men, he said quietly. And you wish for Sangza's because she will be staying here and helping Bran in your absence. He is too young to truly be the Stark in Winterfell. Next to him, Sangza made a pained noise under her breath, but he did not turn to look at her. Go first, Sangza, their father said in a coaxing voice. I would hear your thoughts. You have no choice, she said quietly. If you do not go south, they will declare you traitor and ride north and it will be war. If you do go south, without an army, they will kill you for what you have discovered about Joffrey, and it will be war. If you do go south with an army, they will call you a traitor and a liar and it will be war. It is to be war, was all father said in response. You will choose the third option. You will summon your banners and go south. You will seek to secure the Riverlands first and then, once they are stable, you will ask grandfather to support you, she continued. What I don't know is who you will put on the throne. Jon, he does not want to be king. I have never bothered to know Jon well, but I know that much about him. And I do not think the lords would support him, not without proof of who he was. You could not support Stannis, or ally with him. Now Jon knows who he is because one day Jon may wish for the throne if only to bring Daenerys and Viserys home, and I do not think House Baratheon would allow that. If Jon was to make his claim, he would need to do it now. Robb watched as a small smile flickered across his father's face and then he nodded. You are right, I cannot support Stannis, father said quietly. He leaned forwards and took a swig of his ale and then cleared his throat. Robb. What would you do? He shifted slightly. Then he opened his mouth and closed it again. The third option. If you had evidence, proof, that Jon is Aunt Lyanna and Prince Rhaegar's child, then he would secure the support of parts of the Crown Lands and mayhaps even the Reach. It would be a winning side. But Sansa is right, they will not support him without evidence, and not whilst Viserys and Daenerys live and are viable heirs. Even if you had unconditional proof that Joffrey is a bastard born of incest, the lords of Westeros would still wish for Stannis to be on the throne, ahead of any of Robert's bastards and ahead of Jon or his Targaryen relatives. I do not have proof of Jon's birth, but I do not need it, father replied gently. Over 8 moons ago, a dragon egg that had spent over 70 years at the wall, hatched, Howland said so quietly that, at first, Robb did not think he had heard him properly. The dragon, Winter, is now big enough to mount and your brother has claimed her as his. That cannot be possible, Lewyn breathed out. No one in Westeros has seen a dragon egg in over 40 years and dragons have not lived in nearly 150 years. He paused and took a deep swig of water, then carried on. I do not mean to call you a liar, Lord Reed, but a dragon. That is not quite accurate, Maester Lewyn, father said, his voice soft. Aemon Targaryen is at the wall. A Maester he might be, but he was a Targaryen first. Howland has confirmed that it is his egg that hatched for Jon. There was a stunned silence whilst Lewyn, Sansa and Robb absorbed the words. Robb longed to call his father a liar and a fool. He longed to believe it was a joke or a trick, to have had his father lie to him for so long and now to announce not only that Jon was not his brother but had a dragon. Gods! He wished it was not true. He wished it was true. The third option, that is the one you have chosen, is it now? He said eventually. You're telling us this because you have already summoned the banners and you will ask them to declare for Jon. I have. He doesn't want to be king. He never wanted it. He just wanted to be, she trailed off, a flush creeping over her face as Robb watched. Family, he finished for her, catching her eye, and giving her a reassuring smile. He just wanted to be family, a Stark. You cannot declare for him if he does not wish to be king. Have you even asked him? I have not, father said softly. He would do anything to bring his aunt and uncle home, they are his family and all he has wanted is a family. With Robert Baratheon dead, and a Lannister on the throne, the board is set, Sansa murmured. This is the cleanest chance he would have. I do not like it. But, if he wishes to ever press his claim, he must do it now. He has no love for House Lannister, and given Joffrey and the others are bastards, it makes it even easier for Jon. They have no claim to the throne, but, as a Targaryen, Jon does. Howland Reed agreed, his voice slightly pained. So, you have not asked him? Sansa asked softly. No. He will say yes, Robb said quietly. All eyes in the room swung to look at him. All Jon ever wanted was to be a Stark. He loves House Stark. He loves Father. He would not say no and leave Father to die, because that is what would happen if he said no. He will say yes. He will be unhappy, but he will say yes. Father said quietly. Howland will leave at first light and ride hard to Greywater Watch and ask your brother to come home. When will you tell the Lords of the North? As they arrive. Individually. Robb nodded and they settled into silence. If it is to be war, Father, then we must send Lady Margaery and Lord Willers home, he said, just as the sun was beginning to crest on the horizon. We cannot keep them here and seek to hold them hostage, not with our men marching south. And they will find out about Jon if they stay. Too many people knowing who Jon is, it is bound to get out. Our only option is to send them home as soon as we can. We should keep them here. Through marriage, if necessary, Sansa argued, her voice rising sharply. It will stop the Reach rising for Joffrey. Sansa. No, Father. We should keep them here. The odds are not on our side, and Cersei will offer to wed Margaery to Joffrey if they think it will secure the Reach. If we can secure a match with House Tyrell, who have always been supporters of House Targaryen, then that is 3 of the 7 kingdoms and a dragon. The odds are far better. He gave his sister a long glance and watched as she and their father stared at each other. Eventually, their father broke eye contact and sighed. What would you suggest then, Sansa? He stared at the two of them, trying to work out why his father had backed down. Then he realized that he was offering Sansa the opportunity to prove herself, again. A swell of annoyance washed over him before he realized that, if he was to march south with Father, then someone who had the confidence and knowledge on how to make these decisions would be crucial in ensuring the North did not fall into ruin. Lady Margaery and Robb, she said after a moment. Tell Lord Willers what you have told us. Tell him as soon as he wakes. Tell him that if he needs guidance he can write to his grandmother. Lady Margaery has been quite open about who is truly in charge in the Reach, but that his letter must be discreet and that you will wish to read it. He has a choice. House Tyrell can either be bound by House Stark through marriage, and Robb is the brother of the future king, and they can declare for Jon or Lord Willers, and Lady Margaery can go home as soon as they are packed. When did you become so politically astute? Father said sadly, his eyes looking at Sansa as though he had never seen her before. King's Landing, Sansa murmured, her voice tight. You cannot spend time there without picking up some politics. You do not think we should keep them here against their will? Robb asked, unable to help himself. She shook her head. We must prove ourselves to be better than House Lannister, she replied. Then she shot him a sly look. Besides, I think you may have an ally in a proposed match. He flushed, looking away, and accidentally made eye contact with Father, who was looking faintly uncomfortable. Very well, Father said after a long silence. I will speak to Lord Willers as soon as he wakes. I will tell him what we have discussed tonight, including about winter, and offer him the choice. House Tyrell can leave north now or they can ally with us. ****. How easy it is for you to offer me to be wed, he said softly as they walked down the corridor towards their respective chambers. She glanced up at him, eyes sad. It would be a better match than Willers and I. You would have had to marry one day. What better cause to marry than for our brother and father? And you, Sansa? Who will you marry to secure our brother's throne? She did not reply, but the tightening of her mouth and hunching of her shoulders told him that she already had someone in mind, and he likely would not appreciate the answer. Why did you say I would have an ally in Lady Margaery? He asked eventually as they drew closer to their respective chambers. She glanced up at him, a small smile on her lips, and despite how tired she looked alert and joyful. Because Lady Margaery has spent the last week complaining loudly at me about you. She thinks you do not like her. Apparently you have been avoiding her since your hunt. She is most upset. He flushed. Did you know Father spoke to Theon earlier this week? She continued, her voice growing quiet as they drew to a halt outside her chamber door. When he shook his head, she grimaced and pressed on. He told Theon that he was proud of him. I do not know what else was said, but when Theon left his chambers later, he had been crying. Spying, sister. She glanced up at him and then down the corridor. After what happened in King's Landing. To Lady. Of course. Then she opened her chamber door and said quietly, "Speak to Lady Margaery, brother, before father speaks to Willers. It'll be easier that way." Then she shut the door and left him alone in the corridor. 298 AC, Oberyn Martell. They were still panting with the efforts of their latest round when the door opened and the spider entered, closing the door behind him with a soft snap. Next to him, the whore shifted slightly but otherwise did not move. Daemon's head snapped up to gaze at the arrival, but then he relaxed back down again, his body splayed across the whore and his eyes fixed on Oberyn. "My apologies," the man said in a silky voice. "But, given you are yet to announce yourself at court, despite the fact that we have a new king, and you should be pledging Dorne's allegiance, I have had to make the rather unsavory trip to come to you." He rolled over onto his side, giving the whore's lips one last, lingering, kiss as he did so. Then he sat up and busied himself with pulling on some underclothes. Daemon and the whore did likewise, taking their lead from him. "I have not presented myself at court because I have been busy, Lord Varys," he replied. As he spoke, Daemon finished changing and grasped the whore by the hand and dragged her half-naked form away from the bed. He glanced at Oberyn as he did so and, upon seeing Oberyn's tilted head, nodded, then left the room quickly with the whore. The door closed quietly, and Oberyn pulled on his trousers and grasped under the bed to grab his shirt. He was beginning to button it up as Varys crossed the room. "People talk, as you well know," Varys said as he perched on the edge of the bed and carefully averted his eyes from the stains on the covers and pillows. "You have been here nearly a moon, Prince Oberyn, and yet you have done nothing except wander the streets whilst you enquire about Lord Stark's hasty retreat from King's Landing, train and sleep with whores. Do my activities offend you, Lord Varys?" "We could take this elsewhere if you wish," he said silkily as he lounged back on the stained sheets, now fully clothed, and stared up at the man. "Not at all, Prince Oberyn. I merely find it polite not to look at the evidence of activities that I, myself, cannot participate in. Lest you are overcome with jealousy." The man's lips quirked slightly in what might have, in any other situation, been a hint of a smile. "So why are you here, Prince Oberyn, if you do not plan to present yourself at court?" Varys asked eventually, his voice silky. "It has been a while since I visited. I found I missed the stench of the city." "Oh. And there little old me was thinking that it was something to do with Eddard Stark's abrupt departure from the capital. It is all you have asked anyone about in nearly a moon. You are very transparent and not as subtle as you believe, Prince Oberyn." He glanced up at the spider. Then he sat up straight on the bed, leaving only a few inches distance between himself and the other man. "Shall we dispense with the games, Lord Varys?" "Of course. I am, after all, the one that helped our Warden of the North flee so quickly." "Why would Robert's best friend flee?" he asked, feeling bemused. When Varys did not immediately reply, Oberyn seized the chance to stand up and stretch, feeling his joints popping slightly. He headed over to the big table that was halfway between the large bed and the window that, apparently, had the best view in the brothel. He hadn't looked out of the window yet, he had been rather busy, after all. He snagged a few grapes from the bunch and took a hearty swig of Arbor Gold and leaned against the wall by the window, facing Varys. "Let me answer your question with a question, Prince Oberyn. Do you still long for justice for your sister?" He flinched slightly at the question. Then glared at the man opposite him who was wearing a carefully blank look that told Oberyn that the spider had been hoping to ask this question all along. "A man has never loved their sister as much as I loved Elia," he said softly. "She was everything to me. Our memories are long, Lord Varys. 100 years could pass and Dorne would still seek vengeance for Elia. I would still seek vengeance for Elia. For my niece. For my nephew. Not justice. The gods will not act, and so it will be by my hand, or the hands of those who come after me, that House Martell will get its revenge. Vengeance is what I seek." A philosophical view, Varys mused. Oberyn watched as the men crossed the room to stand next to him. Instead of facing him, The man had his attention on the streets outside the brothel, his eyes moved quickly as though keen to take everything in. It seems the gods have acted, so you may get your chance at justice after all, Varys said eventually. The board is set. War is coming to Westeros. So, I am here with a choice for you: join the king's small council, the seat for Dorne remains empty, or go home. You do not belong here, Prince Oberyn, and searching for the secret that caused Lord Stark to flee to Winterfell will end only with your death. House Martell cannot afford to lose another member. He ignored the second part of the spider's announcement. Did I not just say that Elia was everything to me? He asked, turning as well so he was stood next to the spider and staring out of the window with him. Why offer me something you know I will refuse? How am I to advise a boy whose grandfather ordered the murder of my sister? I would sooner cut off my own cock and watch the crows feast on it. The man regarded him carefully. Then I would suggest you take my offer, and you leave this place, Prince Oberyn. Go home. Go back to Dorne and wait out the coming storm. House Martell has lost too much to lose more in the wars to come. Oberyn turned away from the window, where his eyes had been tracking gold cloaks moving through the street, to glance back at the man. You seem determined to get me to ask about this war you think is coming. So, I will play your game. War, you say, my friend. Varys did not reply and instead kept his gaze fixed on the streets outside. Oberyn watched as the man's eyes fixed on the city watch and he tensed slightly. Varys tried to hide how tense he had become, but to Oberyn it was as obvious as the pungent smell of sex in the air. Daenerys Targaryen has married Khal Drogo, a Dothraki horse lord, and he has promised that his Khalasar will cross the Narrow Sea and take back the throne for her unborn son. Viserys. Said to be unstable. She cannot be queen whilst he lives, he said quietly. He cannot be king whilst another lives, Varys replied, his lips barely moving. He paused, taking a moment to process the man's words. Then realization crashed over him in waves. He put a hand on the ledge of the window as though to steady himself. North. It appears so, the man remarked. Tell me, Prince Oberyn, what will you do with this information? He did not reply for a long time, his eyes fixed on the sun as it moved across the sky from one side to the other. His thoughts moved too quickly for him to fully process. A bastard, he said eventually. That's why Ned Stark went home. Varys shook his head. He went home because he discovered the truth about the late king's children and the attempt to assassinate Daenerys Targaryen and her unborn babe. It would appear, by all accounts, that House Stark has chosen its side in the wars to come. He laughed. The choice you offered me, Dorne, earlier. It was not a choice between the small council and going home. It is a choice between House Lannister and House Stark, and it is no choice. Varys inclined his head. They fell into silence and Oberyn continued watching Varys carefully as the city watch moved closer and closer to Shatta's brothel. Something was wrong. You do not look pleased by the presence of the city watch, he remarked, as the city watch began to turn down a street and head straight towards the great doors of the brothel. It appears that the Dowager Queen has decided that the bastard children of the late king must die, he said softly. I had not thought a base-born girl, less than a year old, with a whore for a mother would pose a threat. He chuckled darkly and turned away from the window. Cersei is a Lannister, they are as bloodthirsty as the lion on their banners. The babe. Barra Varys said quietly, moving to stand next to him. Her mother is in the room 4 doors on your left. He nodded sharply. My thanks, Lord Spider. Whatever for? Cersei wants the babe to die. Well, first, her men will have to get through me. Then he turned, yanked open the door even as he finished tying his scabbard around his waist. He paused, then turned to face Varys. This does not mean Dorne has picked a side. Varys, still stood by the window, met his gaze. Of course not. He let the door slam shut. He did not have his spear, but he had his swords and his daggers. That would be enough against half a dozen city watchmen. Even one dagger would be enough. He paused, as he began to move down the corridor in the direction of the whore's room, his brother's words filtering into his mind. Take no risks. Return once you have the information we need. He sighed. Then he whistled shrilly. There was a momentary silence as the groaning and moaning in the rooms around him stopped. Then he heard the scrambling of men pulling themselves free of their horse and donning their armor. He waited until they were all in the corridor, doors shut on the horse behind them. Then he headed down the corridor towards the babe's room, Demon falling into step beside him. As they drew closer, a woman with a babe in her arms opened the door. He paused and looked at her. She was pretty with light red hair and a dusting of freckles. She was young. Too young, really. She did not look like someone who should be a whore. But then, they rarely did. "The babe is Robert Baratheon's bastard," he said, instead of greeting her. She stared up at him, half horrified and half scared. Then she nodded once, her arms tightening around the babe. "We don't harm little girls in Dorne," he said quietly. "We leave this city shortly. If you want your babe to live, come with us." She chewed on her bottom lip, her eyes darting between him and his men. He sighed. "We don't bed unwilling women in Dorne, either. I will find work for you in Sunspear and your daughter can be brought up in safety, away from King's Landing. If you stay here, your babe will die, the City Watch are coming for her." Surprise flashed over her face. She glanced over his shoulder, he turned slightly, his hand going to one of his daggers. Lord Varys came out of the room and was looking at the girl. As Oberyn watched, the spider inclined his head once and then turned and crossed the corridor through another door and was gone. "I'll come with you." Oberyn paused for a moment, wondering at the hold that Varys had over the small folk of King's Landing, but then felt a small smile slip across his face and said, "Good." In the silence that followed he turned and began to head back down the corridor, thundering boots of the City Watch drew closer. He paused at the widest point in the corridor, and behind him heard his men and the women pause as well. They waited in silence as the City Watch drew closer, finally entering the corridor. There were 6 of them altogether, 1 man at the front and the rest behind him. They stopped within striking distance. "Fools! Stand aside," Prince Oberyn, the man at the front, said. "We have come for the whore. Not the babe?" he asked, leaning back slightly whilst his hand moved to the pommel of his sword. The man flushed and scowled at him. He sighed. "Any man who tries to harm this babe or her mother must go through me," he said softly, withdrawing his sword. He heard Demon pushing the whore behind them and the sounds of his men drawing their own swords. "Put down your sword, Prince Oberyn. We only want the babe. If her mother hands her over, she can go free. Your men do not need to die," said the man. He sighed again. "I thought you wanted the whore." The man moved his hand to the pommel of his sword. Behind him, his men did likewise. "We do not harm little girls in Dorne," Oberyn said quietly. "No matter who their father is. And I will not sit by whilst a babe in arms is murdered simply for being the child of Robert Baratheon." The City Watch men in front of him froze. They glanced from him to his men and back again. The 5 soldiers, they took 2 steps back, but the man at the front did not move. "We are going to leave King's Landing, the girl and her mother are coming with us," he continued. "You will return to your king and his mother and tell them that I allowed you to live. That, unlike House Baratheon and House Lannister, House Martell protects babes in arms. We protect little girls. We don't murder them just because of who their father is. This has nothing to do with your whore of a niece." The man at the front said, spittle flying out of his mouth. The man was dead before he even had time to move to defend himself. Oberyn glanced at Demon, who gave a nonchalant shrug of his shoulders even as the body fell to the floor, blood pouring from the man's severed neck. There was a beat of silence and then the rest of his men quickly dispatched 4 of the remaining 5 men. It was over in an instant. His men were quick and methodical. They enjoyed showing off their skills during spars, but when they needed to be they were ruthlessly efficient. He did not move as he watched Demon wipe his sword on one of the dead men's back. Once the sword was clean, the man turned back to face him. "Was that necessary?" he asked. Demon looked at him unrepentant. "Yes." He sighed and turned to face the remaining man of the city guard. "Tell Cersei and Joffrey what your men tried to do here. Tell them that you were offered a chance at life. That you and your men insulted Princess Elia Martell, Princess Rhaenys Targaryen and Prince Aegon Targaryen, and that the Red Viper took his vengeance," he said quietly. Then he paused and continued, "Tell them that if they think about attacking Dorne that they must know that we shall not stand alone. 298 AC, Daenerys Targaryen. I was to be king, Viserys said quietly, breaking the silence that had settled between them. She started. They were a week's ride now from where she had burned her husband, Mirai Masdew and Quotho alive. The dragons spent most of their time with her, curled around her as she rode her horse or sitting on the saddle as though they were small children. They had not grown much, but she thought that was due to the lack of food rather than anything more serious. Once they had food, they would grow. Behind them, the remains of the khalasar kept marching. They numbered less than 50, 4 more had fled since she had decreed that they would march towards Meereen. She could hear Oren and Ser Jorah discussing whether they had enough supplies for the march, but she ignored their conversation as she turned to glance at Oren. He had his arms wrapped around her son, as he always did when Viserys and Daenerys rode together, and met her gaze. She tilted her head slightly and he caught Ser Jorah's attention, and the knight turned to look at her, placing his hand on the pommel of his sword. She turned back to Viserys. "Brother," she said quietly, trying to prompt him to continue. "Do you ever wonder how different it might have been, Dany?" "What do you mean?" she asked carefully. Behind her she could hear Ser Jorah move his horse slightly closer. "If father had not died, if brother had not taken Lyanna Stark, if the rebellion had not occurred," he said, his voice bitter. "Sometimes," she said eventually. "But I live the life I do. I cannot dwell on something that never existed." He turned to face her. "Like I have, sister." She met his gaze head-on. Once she would have backed down, but not now. She was not alone. She had a khalasar and her dragons, and, even if one had seemed to choose Viserys, she knew instinctively that her dragons would always choose her over her brother. Over her son. Always. "Yes," she replied. "Dany," he said, his voice tensing, like it did before he used to yell at her. "You have spent years, brother, mourning for what could have been. The life you thought you deserved," she said, cutting across him before he could begin to voice his anger. "Years of your life. Wasted. The throne was to be mine." "It is to be mine," he hissed, his voice dropping. Around her, her dragons squawked angrily and the red and black that had claimed her hissed out a puff of smoke. She glanced down proudly at him as he rose up on his legs, which were precariously placed between her own on the saddle, and puffed out another slither of smoke. "In a different life, yes," she murmured, moving her horse's reins to one hand to run her hand gently down her dragon's back. He relaxed under her attention, and his brothers, who had been curled around her neck, relaxed too. "But not in this life, brother. We have a nephew. His claim is better. A bastard." She stiffened slightly. Clearly, Viserys had worked himself into a frenzy and had, finally, decided now was the time to pick the fight with her about their nephew. She glanced back at her brother. His gaze was locked on the red and black dragon and his brows were furrowed. "He does not have a dragon," Viserys said at last. "If we waited, sweet sister, until our dragons were grown, we could take the throne easily. As Aegon did. We could marry, strengthen House Targaryen, as Aegon did." She met his eyes, sad to see the madness that she had thought gone was back. His eyes were bright, frenzied even, and madness seemed to bloom behind them. It made the hairs on the back of neck stand on end and she hid a flinch. She felt her heart crack. She had truly thought he was getting better. "My dragons," she said gently. "I hatched them, Viserys. They are my children. Aerion might have chosen you, brother, but he will always come to me when I call. They will always pick me." He did not refute her claims, for they had already been proven true in the week that the dragons had been alive for. He scowled at her, his mouth tightening, and looked at the green and bronze dragon he had named Aerion. Aerion. She hid a sigh as she realized why her brother had chosen that name for his dragon. Aerion Bright Flame. The Targaryen who tried to drink wildfire. "Fool. We could rule as equals, Dany," he said, his voice getting softer again as he tried to coax her to agree with him. She shook her head and moved her horse closer to him. The dragons hissed slightly. "We will not, Viserys. I will not force you to come with me to Westeros. But I am going to Westeros. The dragons are coming with me." I am going to support our nephew's claim to the Iron Throne, and when the time is right, I will help him take it with fire and blood. It does not matter if he does not have a dragon yet, he will one day. There are more dragon eggs in the world, and my dragons may lay a clutch of their own one day. He is a Targaryen, brother. He is a bastard. He is Rhaegar's son. Our nephew, she replied. I do not care if he is a bastard. His claim is better than ours, and he would make a better ruler than either of us. I will make a great king, Viserys spat out, his eyes darting wildly about. I am a dragon. You would have made a shit king, she replied. You are cruel and heartless. You do not do anything unless it benefits you in some way. He glanced at her and made to open his mouth, but she cut across him before he could speak. Do not push me, Viserys, she said firmly. You are my brother. I do not want to be without you, she continued, placing a gentle hand on her brother's arm. You have been a terrible brother. You would have been as bad a king as father was, you know this to be true. He flinched as she spoke and grew paler, his eyes growing dim as he looked at her. But, despite all the cruelty you have heaped on me, all the abuse you have leveled at me, the fact you sold me to be raped, you are still my brother. You saved my life. I do not want to abandon you, brother. But do not make me pick between you and our nephew, because I will pick him. Viserys pulled his arm away and kicked his horse into a trot, leaving her staring sadly after him. Interlude, 298 AC, Aemon, flashback. You should not have told her about Jon, Benjen said, frustration lacing his voice. His tone was sharper than any he had ever used with Aemon before. She is too young. If I had not told her, she would have asked questions, he replied. It is better than she learns enough of the truth that her thirst for knowledge is satisfied. Benjen sighed loudly. Ned is not going to be happy. I find myself unable to care about your brother's thoughts and feelings on the matter of Jon's birth, he said mildly. That is not fair, Aemon, Benjen said quietly. I know, he replied. But she had to know, Benjen. She would have asked questions, possibly to the wrong people, and either got herself hurt or killer or Jon hurt and killed. Benjen glanced up at him, his eyes defeated, and posture hunched. She is so like Lyanna. He paused, thinking about the little Stark who had caused chaos in her week at the wall. She had masterfully manipulated nearly every man, save the Lord Commander, at the wall into doing what she wanted. She was bright and vibrant and as eager to learn the art of the sword as she was to hear about her histories, if they were exciting ones, of course. She enjoyed riding and sparring as much as she enjoyed evening teas and bawdy stories. She is not destined to be a lady, he replied. She does not wish it. I have not spoken to her of it, of course, but I cannot imagine it is a life that little Stark wants. Little Stark. Sir Alisa has taken to calling her that. It appears that the name gets under her skin and makes her rash when they spar. That is cruel of him. Smart, I think. He uses it to catch her off guard, to ensure she slips up, and then he tells her what she has done wrong. You think he is teaching her properly? You don't. They settled into another silence again. Aemon busied himself with spooning stew into his mouth as he carefully pretended not to examine the various emotions flitting across Benjen's face. Do you think she will be safe until my return? I have not decided how to reply to my brother's scroll, and Arya seems in no rush to leave. Jory is content to wait, Benjen said once Aemon had finished eating. I do not think I can send them back without having a reply for Ned, so much needs to be said and I cannot leave it to chance in a raven's scroll. She will be fine, he returned. There are rapists and murderers here, of course, but I think any man who has those thoughts about your niece will find themselves coming very unstuck. Benjen's lips quirked into a smile. She is terrifying, isn't she? She is, he agreed. And she has Sir Alisa and the Lord Commander on her side, that counts for a lot, here. And you, Benjen said quietly. There is not a man in Castle Black that does not respect you, Aemon. He smiled at his friend and, once he had set his food bowl down on his bedside table, leaned back against his pillows. There is something else on your mind, Benjen. The Lord Commander wishes me to go north to find Sir Waymar Royce, Benjen said eventually. I do not like it. The man is no coward and guard and Will were no fools. They would not have deserted, and they would not have started a fight they did not think they could win. and all of them to vanish. It's not possible. They are dead, I am sure. The question that bothers me is how. God was a ranger for 40 years, Eamon. He was a better ranger than me, in truth. Have you shared these worries with the Lord Commander? No, I would not have shared them with you if you had not seen the worry in my face. You did not wish me to think you a coward. Am I not a coward? First Ranger scared of going north to look for his men who are likely dead. No, he replied gently. I do not think you a coward. You are, perhaps, the least cowardly man I have ever met. Horseshit, Benjen replied. A man who kept his brother's secret for nearly 6 and 10 years. A man who goes beyond the wall every moon to search for wildings. A man who chose family over duty, he remarked. Tell me, Benjen Stark, how are you a coward? Benjen did not reply for a moment and instead flushed slightly. Eamon turned his head away to stare at the ceiling to give Benjen some time to clear any embarrassment he felt. Lord Commander Mormont has asked that I take 6 men, he said eventually. You disagree? He asked, turning his gaze back to Benjen. Guard and Will were smart, Eamon. Something happened. Either they were overwhelmed, or they were surprised. You think it was the second? Yes, as I said, they would not have started a fight they could not have won. You do not wish to take 6 men with you. If they were surprised, then the same could happen to me. I would be leading 6 men to their deaths. The Lord Commander will listen to you if you tell him this, he said after a brief pause. Tell him you wish to ride out alone. You think he will agree? You are First Ranger, make him agree. Benjen shot him a small smile and then yawned widely. I should go. I need sleep before I ride out tomorrow, he said quietly as he rose to his feet. Thank you, Eamon, for listening. Of course, he replied. If I do not see you before you leave, take care, Benjen. We are family now, I expect you to return. Benjen nodded and gave him another small smile. If I have not returned within a moon, send Arya home and write to my brother, he said. Then he heaved out a sigh. Tell him I forgive him. You will write to him yourself when you return. Chapter 15, Negotiation. Chapter Text. Chapter Summary. 4 people find out about Jon. Winter and Jon head north. In our interlude, Eamon and Jon discuss Dawn. Notes: we'll have a chunky Jon POV soon, conscious they have been a bit shorter recently and he is, after all, the main character. 298 AC, Robb Stark. Margaery Tyrell was beautiful. She was kind. She was intelligent. She was fiery. She was funny. She was everything a highborn lady should be. And yet she made him nervous. He had been avoiding her since the hunt they had gone on. It had been, altogether, a complete disaster. Gendry had fallen off his horse and had to be taken back to Winterfell by Sansa within 10 minutes of them setting off, and Theon had just vanished, only to appear hours later in the Great Hall looking shifty. The result was that it left Margaery, Robb, and Grey Wind alone for most of the day in the Wolf's Wood. He had suggested they go back, of course he had. He was no fool. He knew it was not appropriate to be out there alone with no chaperones, with just Grey Wind as a guard. Yet, Margaery Tyrell had just laughed and given her horse a light tap with her heels and cantered off, and, of course, he had no choice but to follow. Nothing had happened. Nothing untoward at all. They had laughed, hunted, and spoken from just after dawn until dusk, when they had ridden their horses back into the courtyard of Winterfell. Not a moment had been spent in silence. She had joked with him and laughed at his impression of Septa Mordaunt's. She had told him about her brothers and of the Reach. He had told her about Jon and how he missed his brother. She had spoken of her desire to meet Arya, who Sansa had told her so much about already, and how sweet Rickon was. They had discussed gods. If the gods exist, Lord Robb, I am yet to see evidence of it. You have not seen King's Landing. Once you have, you will share my assessment of the gods and Essos, hawking, hunting, the constellations in the sky and their favorite meals. And that night and he had gone to bed, feeling lighter than he had in moons. Then the next morning he had woken up and realized it could not happen again. He could not do as he wished and bring shame on his father, on his house. Because that was what would happen, it would bring shame. He would cave into her wishes. She was, after all, not subtle, because she was beautiful and he was weak, and then he would have to marry her. And everyone would know what he had done. So, he kept away from her. In the days that followed, something about her started to set him on edge. Her eyes missed nothing. He had seen her watching him, almost inspecting him, and finding him wanting in some way. He was sure she had not meant to, but the way she looked at him made him feel inadequate. As though he could not compare in any way to the men in the South. Not that he wanted to. But he was unused to the feeling of not being enough. He only realized he had been staring at her, without truly meaning to, that morning when Theon kicked him under the table. "Rob!" Theon hissed. "She is looking at you." He fixed his eyes on her properly and realized that she was, in fact, staring straight at him. Her eyes were narrowed and mouth set. He glanced away. "Coward!" Theon hissed. He was. He didn't reply and instead stabbed angrily into his bowl of porridge, feeling unsatisfied when the spoon slid easily through the lumpy meal, and stared at it. He didn't glance up again, even as Theon rose from the table and left him to stew in silence. He ignored Rickon as he rushed past with Shaggy Dog, and he barely noticed Hodder carrying Bran past. He only became aware that the great hall was nearly empty when the only noises that remained were the whispered giggles of Lady Margaery and Sansa. He glanced up and sighed as he realized even his father and Lord Willers were gone. He heaved in a deep breath to steady himself and, just as Lady Margaery and Sansa made to walk past, he stood up and grabbed their attention. "Lady Margaery. I wondered if I might have a moment of your time." She glanced up at him, her eyebrows raising slightly in surprise. As she looked at him, and he tried to resist blushing or stepping away from her, her gaze seemed to burn straight through him. Then a soft smile spread over her face, and she murmured, "Of course, Lord Rob." "The gods would?" he asked. "Of course," she replied, taking his offered arm, and letting him guide her away from Sansa without another word. He met Sansa's eyes as they turned away and his sister gave him a soft smile and a small nod. They walked in silence to the Godswood. As they crossed the courtyard, Grey Wind darted out from the kennels and fell in behind them. It was a slightly uncomfortable walk, and he could see Lady Margaery looking at him out of the corner of his eye. Her brown eyes were fixed on his profile, and she seemed to be scanning him for tells, anything to inform her as to what this might be about. Eventually, when they got to Godswood, he stopped walking. She stopped too. He floundered for a moment as he withdrew his arm. She let go easily and stepped away, and he couldn't help but feel hurt by the movement. Next to him, Grey Wind shoved him gently with his snout. He reached down instinctively and felt his direwolf inch closer, both for warmth and support. "I am sorry," he began, not looking at her and instead fixing his gaze on the weirwood tree behind her. "Whatever for, Lord Rob?" she replied. "Ignoring me since the hunt? Refusing to meet my eyes just now? Making me feel like an unwanted inconvenience in your home? Or for having your direwolf follow me about these last weeks? Gods! I have not even been able to sleep without him scratching at my door. I did not think House Stark for cowards, Lord Rob. So why will you not look at me, and why have you set your direwolf to following me instead of an actual soldier? If you wish someone to spy on me, you would be better employing a man instead of Grey Wind." He jerked his head back to her. Her eyes were blazing as though fires burned inside them. "All of it," he murmured. Not that he had done anything with Grey Wind, and it did, rather, explain where his direwolf had been these last weeks. "Traitor." She blinked. Then she sighed. "I suppose that will do." She moved a bit further away and cast her gaze around the Godswood. She let out another loud sigh, and he watched as her chest rise and fall as air left her body. He pulled his eyes away quickly, unwilling to linger, and busied himself with staring at the ground. In his peripheral vision he saw her cross over to the pool of water at the base of the weirwood. "Your face tells me you do not have good news. I suppose I best sit down for this." He watched as she lowered herself to the ground and her skirts pulled out around her. She glanced up at him and then murmured, "Will you not join me?" He shook his head. "I like to stand when I think." A small smile flit over her lips. "Garland does that." "The knight?" he asked, recalling the second brother she had mentioned. She nodded. He watched her for a moment as she turned her gaze to the pool of water. He felt his mouth go a bit dry. He opened it several times, then closed it again. Then he swallowed. Next to him, Grey Wind huffed and abandoned him, heading over to curl up next to Lady Margaery. She turned her head from the pool and glanced at the direwolf. She heaved out another sigh and then her hand went out and, when Grey Wind did not move, she gave the direwolf a quick scratch behind the ear. Grey Wind dropped to the ground as though a bolt had gone through him, but when Lady Margaery made to withdraw her hand he grumbled. She did not even glance at Robb as she let out another loud sigh and continued scratching him. "My father is speaking to your brother," he began. Then his throat went dry. "About a match," Margaery replied. At his shocked look she let out a slightly dark laugh. "Come, Lord Robb, did you truly think that Willers and I would not assume that was why your father asked to speak to him in private the night after you, Sansa, the Maester, Howland Reed and your father spent the night talking?" She glanced up at him, her hand tangling in Grey Wind's fur and murmured, "You are not as subtle as you think. Your sister, she has potential. But the rest of you are as obvious as the nose on your direwolf's face." He sighed and crossed over to throw himself down on the ground the other side of Grey Wind. "What I do not understand, is why the father of a boy who has not so much as looked at me for 2 weeks is going to propose a match," Margaery continued, watching him intently. "I've looked," he said. Then he flushed and looked away again. It was her turn to flush now. He could just see the color creeping over her partially exposed chest and neck. He turned further away, so as not to be caught staring. They were silent for a moment. "So, why the match? Something is going on, is it not?" she pressed. Then, without giving him a chance to reply, she carried on. "Ned Stark, the best friend of the king, goes south to be his hand and then leaves only a moon or so later to return to the north, without saying a word to his king. By all accounts he left half his belongings in King's Landing and fled. And the king did nothing. Most peculiar. Then we have the comings and goings in White Harbor. Seal Rock was manned, and do not think for a moment that I believed the rubbish from Lord Willis about pirates. At least a quarter of the Marndaeli forces were missing. I wonder where they were, not Moat Cailin, surely." At his surprised face she let out another dark laugh. "Come. Tell me. That is why you brought me here, is it not? My father is telling your brother that Joffrey is a bastard born of incest between Cersei and Jaime Lannister, as are Myrcella and Tommen, and that Jaime Lannister is the reason my brother is a cripple. He pushed Bran out of the Broken Tower, we think. My mother has arrested Tyrion Lannister for crimes against House Stark, and Tywin Lannister has set the Riverlands ablaze in response. Robert, the king, is dead. All his true heirs are bastards," he said, the words tumbling out of his mouth. Margaery was silent for a moment. Then she sighed. "Grandmother did always suspect something was rather wrong with Joffrey. Do you have proof?" He shook his head, turning to look at her as he did so. "But it is why father brought Gendry to the north. To put him on the throne?" she asked, her eyes shrewd and calculating. "By rights, if what you say is true, then Lord Stannis is Robert's heir." He shook his head. "Not that," he murmured. "Truly, I think it was to keep his friend's son safe. The king was his oldest friend. And who knows what Cersei would have done if the rumors got out that Joffrey was born of incest between her and the Kingslayer, and the king had left bastard children in King's Landing. So, your father is going to call his banners, that is why you are telling me. You want House Tyrell to support your father in pushing the Lannisters out of the Riverlands and removing Joffrey from the throne." "Yes, but it is not that simple," he said. "It seems very simple to me," Margaery replied, her hand moving gracefully across Grey Wind's back. She did not seem angry, more bemused. "Who does he plan to put on the throne? Lord Stannis would be a disaster. Jon Arryn." She glanced up at him. "He's dead, Robb. My brother, Jon." Her mouth opened. Then it closed. Then she sighed. "What is it you are not telling me?" "Jon, he is not my father's son." "Your Uncle Brandon's?" she asked. "That would explain much. Grandmother said he did have a reputation, and you father did not." "My aunt, Lyanna." Margaery flinched as though struck. "Oh." Her face went pale for a moment as though she was considering something too horrible to contemplate. "I am sorry." What for? A bastard born of rape, she whispered. Your aunt, Rob. He flinched. He had not even asked the question himself to his father. Did they even know the manner of Jon's birth? He won't be accepted, she said quietly. A Targaryen bastard would be one thing, Rob, but a bastard born of rape. They will never support him. They will, he said, more confidently that he felt. He will have the North and the Riverlands. And you think if you get the Reach, through me, that it is a winning side, she finished. But Viserys Targaryen and his sister both still live. Their claims are true. If one was to support a claimant who was not Lord Stannis, then they would be wise to support Viserys. He glanced up at her. They do not have a dragon, and even as a bastard, Jon is Rhaegar's only living heir. No one has a dragon, don't be ridiculous. Jon does. Dragons have not existed in this world for nearly 150 years. Yet Howland Reed swears that my brother has one. She glanced away from him, and her hands knotted in Grey Wind's fur. The last Targaryen dragons were deformed. They could not even be ridden. Jon's can. You put a lot of faith in the word of a man that you do not know. He turned slightly, swinging himself around so he was sitting facing her. You do not need to believe me. But I am telling you the truth. I wish for you to have all the facts before you and your brother come to a decision, he said. A bastard born of rape, he might well be, we cannot know for sure. But he is your brother, and you think he has a dragon, Margaery finished. Then she sighed and ripped her eyes from him to glance up at the sky. Your father is very strong. That or he is very stupid. Pardon. To have lied to his wife for that long. 6 and 10 years. All the anger he must have faced. All the tears. The frustration. And he still did not tell her, she whispered. He must love your brother so much to keep that secret, despite the harm it did his marriage and the pain it brought him and others. Jon is his son. She glanced down at him. We will need to see proof before we can commit. A dragon would give us more than your word. Words are not enough. You understand that, surely. That will not be possible. You ask too much. We are not asking. Was it your decision? He shook his head. Sansa. He nodded. A small smile flitted over her lips. She thought that a match with House Tyrell, you and I, would be a good way to cement a strong alliance. And that we are already here, it gives us no true choice, Margaery said quietly. She is smart. Tell me, how quickly did she offer you up as a prize? It was not like that, he protested. Yes, it was, she replied. Then she glanced at him, and her mouth opened in surprise. Oh. You truly have no idea why she wished for a match between you and I and not one between herself and Willers. I don't want to play games, Margaery, he bit out. Do you wish for the match? She asked. Do you want to wed me, Robb Stark? Or do you simply wish to help your brother's claim? I would be honored to wed you. I could not ask for a stronger, kinder, more intelligent, or more beautiful woman to be my wife. But I would also wed you to help my brother's claim and for the North. And if there was no claim? She asked, looking up at him, her hands moving gently through Grey Wind's fur. I would still be honored to wed you. She glanced up at him. Even as he watched, he saw her eyes soften slightly. Then she turned away and the spell was broken. So, your father wishes for a match to put a boy, who we think is a bastard born of rape, but cannot be sure, on the throne that was sent to the Night's Watch. And dragon aside, the only proof we have that Jon is Rhaegar's heir is the word of your father, who you claim has lied for over a decade. Jon didn't swear his vows. Margaery moved her hands through Grey Wind's fur as she stared at the direwolf. How did Jon find out? Your father cannot have told him. No one is foolish enough to put that in a letter, and a man does not go to the Night's Watch only not to join. So, he must have found out there. Maester Aemon, the Maester at Castle Black. Margaery's head whipped back around to him, her eyes wide. Gods! He must be 100, he supports Jon's claim. He shook his head. I do not know. You will need to send a raven to Castle Black. If a Targaryen vouches for him, that will help his claim. A dragon will do too, although I still do not believe it to be true, she said. But it will be difficult, Rob. You know this. Even if my brother agrees to this and so does my grandmother and you secure the reach, you may still not win. And even if you do win, Jon will have a hard time proving himself not just to the lords but to the small folk as well. I know. Does Jon even want the throne? All you and your siblings have said about him, he does not sound like a man who wishes for power. I do not know. But I know that he wants to bring his aunt and uncle home, any man would, and they are Jon's family. All he ever wanted was a family, he replied, lowering his voice quietly. Besides, he cannot stay as he is now, not with his dragon. He would be a good king though. He is a good man. I am proud to call him my brother. So, you will march to war for vengeance against House Lannister and with the aim to put a boy who is likely a bastard born of rape, who may not even wish for the throne, on the Iron Throne. When she put it that simply, it seemed insane. But it was not that simple, not for them. They sat there in silence for a moment. Margaery kept her eyes fixed on Grey Wind, who had fallen asleep between them and was letting out soft little snores. Robb alternated between gazing at her and staring at the pool of water. He wished he could know what she was thinking, but he did not yet know her well enough to understand the emotions that was flicking across her face. She did not seem upset though. Not happy either. But not upset, and that was the main thing. My brother will agree to your father's request, she said eventually. He will do what he thinks is best for House Tyrell. Growing strong, he replied. I do not wish to marry someone who is unwilling though. If you truly do not wish for a match, we can look for another way. She laughed. There is no other way to secure such an alliance. I am sorry. She smiled gently at him and withdrew her hand from Grey Wind's fur to clasp his arm gently. I always knew I would be married to secure an alliance. To help House Tyrell. It is a woman's duty, she said gently. A marriage to you is not the worst fate a woman could face. He stayed silent, not sure whether to find her comment insulting or not. She sighed and he found himself staring at her again. She withdrew her hand, and he mourned the loss for a moment. It had felt so natural. I like you, Robb Stark, she said, rising to her feet. Her eyes flashed as the sun's light reflected off them. I think you will make a good husband. I truly hope that your brother is all he says he is, for I do not wish to be a widow so soon after I become a wife. Then she turned and left him alone in the Godswood. 298 AC, Ned Stark. Willers Tyrell was not his father, in much the same way that Ned was not Rickard. He struggled to remind himself of it at times, particularly as Lord Willers did look incredibly like his father had done all those years ago when Ned had first seen him. But Lord Willers was smarter both in terms of being perceptive but also actual intelligence. He was also more cautious. Where Mace Tyrell was loud and affable and prone to telling exaggerated stories and, from what Ned remembered, fond of his food and drink, Willers Tyrell was the opposite. Lord Willers had not seemed surprised when Ned had asked to speak to him that morning. In fact, the man had exchanged a quick look with Margaery, who had jerked her head in a nod so quickly that if Ned had not been staring at her he would have missed it, and merrily agreed to follow him. He offered his apologies for making the man walk up several flights of stairs, but Lord Willers has just waved it away. Once they were settled in his solar, he poured water for both. It was, he thought, too early for ale, and then leaned back against his chair and took a moment to compose his thoughts. Opposite him, Willers Tyrell sipped carefully on his water and then turned his attention to the books and scrolls that Ned had on various shelves around the room. Your collection is most impressive, Lord Stark, Willers Tyrell said, breaking the silence. You have a separate library as well. Lord Robb was most kind to show it to me. Are these books and scrolls your personal collection or just your favorites? Many belong to my wife, he replied. She is a keen reader with a sharp mind. But the ones along the far wall were my father's and before him, his father's. I have seen no reason to change them. Please, if there are any titles that catch your interest, do feel free to read them, just return them hereafter. Willers Tyrell's eyebrows rose slightly in surprise. That is most kind of you. He smiled at the man and then took another sip of water. You will be wondering, I imagine, why I have asked to meet you. A thin smile slid over Willers' face. I have an idea, as does my sister, but I know better to presume. His tongue darted out and he wet his lips again. The king is dead, he said quietly. Joffrey sits on the throne. Willer's face twisted slightly. A foul little boy, he murmured. Judging by your face, Lord Stark, you think the same. You have met him. Thankfully, I have not. But rumors travel well in the south. I am well aware of the boy's undesirable proclivities. And his parentage. Willer's eyes snapped up. I have heard no rumors to suggest he is anything other than what he claims to be. You have seen Gendry? He asked. When Willers nodded, he continued. Robert, Stannis, Renly, Gendry and even Stannis' daughter are all of dark hair and blue eye. Rumor has it that even Robert's bastards in the Vale and the Stormlands have the same features. I believe, as did Jon Arryn, and that is why he is dead, that Joffrey is not Robert's son. In fact, I do not believe that any of the Queen's children are Robert's. Willers blanched. She would not. Surely, the Queen would not be so foolish. It's arrogance, he replied. The father. I believe the father is the Kingslayer. Willers blanched more forcefully. Then he reached across the table and took a sip of water. Can you prove it? No. The fact they are blonde and green-eyed and not dark-haired and blue-eyed does not mean they are bastards, yet alone bastards born of incest, Willers Tyrell murmured. Lord Robb does not look like a Stark at all, but that does not mean he is not your son. These are serious allegations to make, Lord Stark. When the king was here, we went out on a hunt. Only the Kingslayer and the Queen remained behind along with the children, whose whereabouts can be accounted for, he said quietly. And a few weeks ago, an assassin tried to kill my son. He was still unconscious. What threat is a boy who cannot walk again and who is yet to wake up, unless he saw something he should not have, and someone was worried he would wake up and remember? That is when your son fall, is it not? I heard the servants talking about it. It is. You think he saw them? That they pushed him? I do. My wife does. Is there anyone else who could prove your claims true? I believe Lord Varys knows the truth. That is not enough. What would be? The other man laughed. Nothing. You are telling me this because you wish House Tyrell to declare war with you. To march against the Lannisters. My house would burn. I am telling you this, Lord Willers, because the Riverlands already burns. My wife has taken Tyrion Lannister hostage and Tywin Lannister has set the Riverlands ablaze in response, and I will be marching south to root the Lannisters out. I have summoned my banners and I march within the next moon, I hope. That does not change my answer. And if I told that I plan to put a Targaryen on the throne? A Targaryen who has northern blood in his veins and a dragon that is big enough to ride. It changes our odds, does it not? Willers Tyrell was silent for a moment. I'd ask you for proof that your nephew is trueborn and to see this dragon with my own eyes. I cannot provide any, he replied quietly. But the dragon, it is my hope she will be here shortly, along with my son. Willers Tyrell let out a loud sigh. You are asking me to believe that the boy currently sitting on the throne is a bastard born of incest, that the Lannisters have tried to kill your son, twice, and that the boy you claim to be your son is in fact the child of your sister and Prince Rhaegar Targaryen, and he has a dragon. You have my word and honor, as a Stark. Stark honor and Stark words. You've told me you've lied to the king, your wife, and your own children for 6 and 10 years, Lord Stark. How I am to trust your words and your honor? The only thing you trade on yet seem to have so little of. Willers Tyrell snapped, his eyes angry and bright. His hands gripped his cane tightly until, even as Ned watched, the man's fingers went white. Then his grip relaxed, and he released one hand from his cane to run it down his face. My apologies, Lord Stark. It is fine, he said, waving his hand. Ask yourself this, Lord Willers, why would I lie? To give yourself a better chance of winning the war that you seem to be intent on starting. We did not start this war, he bit out. Willers Tyrell sighed loudly. What do you want, Lord Stark? I think you already know, Lord Willers, he replied, leaning back, and taking a deep wig of water. You wish for a match with Margaery and Robb. Then you want us to pledge our forces to Jon to help him retake his father's crown. I do. A match between Margaery and Jon is what we will want in exchange for our support. I cannot negotiate a match with my son when he is not here, and I cannot ask his opinion. Yet you are prepared to declare war when he is not here. Does he even know what you are planning on doing? He hid a flinch. He does not, but he will agree that we have no choice. And if I say no, then you leave and go home. I would ask that you do not take up arms against us in the wars to come, but I cannot stop you. Willers Tyrell's lips quirked in a smile. You're not very good at this, Lord Stark. What is to stop me telling every man I see that you plan on declaring war against the throne? Nothing, he replied. But when Jon takes the throne, and he will take the throne, which houses do you think he will rise up further? Who will the king be closer to than his brother and his brother's wife? Will the Riverlands fight for him? I believe so. The Vale. I do not know. Does Stannis Baratheon know about the children? I believe so, he has his suspicions, at least. Willers Tyrell jerked his head in a nod. That is good. How so? Because if Stannis Baratheon has his doubts, then he will make a move when you do. The only issue is that he will want the throne as well. But it means that the Lannisters will stand alone or, at worst, they have the Vale. It makes the odds better. If you joined forces with the Lannisters, you would likely be assured a victory, though he couldn't help but point out. Between you, you would outnumber us 2-1. We cannot support Stannis, and so our forces would be divided, not united. Once you had routed us, you could easily finish Stannis, or the other way around. The Lannisters do not have a dragon, though. They do not. If we do this, Lord Stark, then once we have agreement from my grandmother and your banners have agreed to your plan, then you will write to every house in Westeros and declare Joffrey and his siblings to be bastards born of incest, and claim you fled King's Landing because the Queen knew you had uncovered her secret and you feared for the lives of your daughter and your household. You will also state that you are declaring your support for House Targaryen. Why? Why not Jon? Why his house? Because if you announce that Joffrey is a bastard, you may pick up some stragglers who long for vengeance against House Lannister, Lord Willers replied. And if you declare for House Targaryen and not your nephew, then we avoid the concerns about your nephew's legitimacy. At least for now. People will find out as you march south, but you can deal with that as and when. Very well, he said. He did not like it did not seem the honorable path to take. But it was the best path and it made sense. He would not have thought of it himself, but then again, this was why he did not belong in the south. It was different there, as Lord Willers was aptly demonstrating now. He sighed, casting his gaze towards the window, and blinked in surprise to realize the sun was so high in the sky. Do we have an agreement then, Lord Willers? Across from him, Willers Tyrell took a deep swig of water. We do. But my grandmother is not going to be happy. She may write and ask for further concessions. And why is that? She always did wish for Margaery to be queen. He hid a smile. Then he stood and held out his hand. It took Willers Tyrell a moment to rise to his feet, but once he did, he grasped the offered arm. They had an agreement. Once they were settled back down and the atmosphere was slightly less strained. He said quietly, I did not know when you came here what would happen, that Robert would die, and that my wife would take Lord Tyrion, or that Jon would need to make his move soon. If I knew what was coming, then my honor would have demanded that I send you home before now. But I could not let you leave when my bannermen will shortly begin to arrive without having extracted some sort of agreement from you. I suppose you would have, Willers murmured. You Starks and your honor. It will get you killed. You are lucky that it has not already. If you had stayed in King's Landing and made your allegations against the Queen, you would have lost your head. I know. Tell me though, this is not your plan. Nor is it Rob's, Sansa. He inclined his head. Grandmother will want to meet her. After the war, he replied. But do not be surprised if Sansa says no. She does not wish to leave her home again. Willers Tyrell nodded. Very well. Let us go and ride the Raven for my grandmother. If she agrees, I will write back to confirm that Margaery has been wed. Then I will help you and your son prepare for this war whilst grandmother instructs my father to call the banners. And if she does not agree, we will return to the Reach, as you said we could, the man said quietly. We will sit out this war though. Dragon or no dragon, I would rather my sister married to a boy she cared for than a boy who kills cats. I give you my word. 298 AC, Olenna Tyrell. She had expected to hear from her grandson before now. So, when Lomis raced into her chambers without knocking and declared he had received a raven from Winterfell that was marked urgent and for her eyes only, she was worried. She knew that the North would not harm her grandchildren, but that did not mean others wouldn't. Given she was still dealing with Mace's sulking and whinging that she had sent his children away without informing him, the last thing she needed was bad news. She waited until Lomis' footsteps could no longer be heard. Then she hastily opened the scroll and read the words quickly. Then, she blinked and read them again. Then, finally, a third time. Grandmother. You were right to send us here. I have agreed a match between Margaery and Lord Robb. Once we have your blessing, they will be wed. I will remain here for the foreseeable. Separately, with regards to the matter we have previously discussed, I recommend you consider the dates that would work best for claims to be made. Willers. She felt her eyebrows rise slightly. Then she sighed. She leaned over her table and grasped the jug of Arbor Gold and poured a generous amount into her goblet. Then she added another few sloshes for good measure. Once she was content her glass was full enough, she rose and crossed over to the window, glass in hand, and peered down at the courtyard below. She could just see Garland drilling some of his men. She glanced to the side and grimaced as her eyes fixed on a gaggle of silly little girls watching her grandson train. Fools. Turning her attention to the lands beyond Highgarden, she considered the matter at hand. Willers would not have agreed such a match if he did not think it was best for the Reach. He knew better. Which begged the question, why was a match with the heir to the North the best match? Margaery was to be queen. So, something was happening in the North, and now Robb Stark was a better candidate now for Margaery than that little lion that sat on the throne. But she knew the Starks, they did not wish to be kings. So, there was another question. The second issue was that Willers would not have voluntarily mentioned he would remain in the North unless he wished to make it clear he could not travel. The question was Willers being forced to stay there or was he choosing to for other reasons? The Starks would not keep her grandchildren as hostages, she knew them. Ned Stark was too honorable to contemplate such an act. So, Willers was staying there through choice and there was only one thing that would stop him returning, war. She sighed and took a deep swig of wine. So, Willers was recommending that House Tyrell and the Reach align with House Stark in the wars to come. War against who though? She nearly laughed when the question crossed her mind. The crown. Of course. Robert Baratheon was dead, and Stannis Baratheon had fled to Dragonstone. Rumors of war had been doing the rounds for weeks. But no one had yet acted. The question now was, would Lord Stark support Stannis? She shifted slightly and sighed. What had the Lannisters done to earn the wrath of Ned Stark? She knew, of course, that the Riverlands burned, but that was not enough to declare war against the crown. A few skirmishes, maybe. But nothing more serious. And then there is the final paragraph. The matter of the throne. So, someone else had a claim. Someone else who, clearly, had ties to the North, otherwise Willers would not be recommending they bind themselves so tightly to the North. That ruled Stannis out. Someone else then. Someone with a claim. She drained her glass of wine and turned to put the glass down on a nearby table. Then she continued staring out of the window. There were few who could hope to successfully lay claim the throne, a child of Robert Baratheon, Stannis, Renly or a Targaryen. Joffrey was, she was inclined to believe, neither, and the chances of Ned Stark supporting Joffrey, given Willers seemed to believe war was coming, was minuscule. No, Ned Stark would be against the Lannisters here. Stannis, she had already ruled out. Only a fool would back Renly. So, a Targaryen. Dates. Not Viserys or Daenerys, their claims were uncontested. But it could not be them, not after the rebellion, surely. Someone else then. Consider the dates. She tapped her fingers on the window ledge. House Stark aligning with House Targaryen. House Stark and House Targaryen. She felt a smile flicker over her lips. Oh. Well played, Eddard Stark, she murmured. A Targaryen bastard, hidden in the North. Her granddaughter, to be wedded to the brother of the king. Why not the king himself? She sighed. Of course. Margaery always did think with her heart. She crossed back over to her desk and grasped the note from Willers, then she held it over the candle she kept burning on her desk for matters like this. Once the scroll was gone, she cast her eyes to the map that she always kept on her desk. It showed the whole of Westeros, or at least the major keeps, rivers, and roads. She heaved out a sigh and then opened a drawer of her desk and began moving the figures that made up the great houses of Westeros and their bannermen onto the map. Then she stared at it. A smile slid over her face. It was a good force. If Stannis did mean to press ahead with his ridiculous claim, which rumors said he was considering, it was a winning force. They would need to be careful though, sandwiched between the Westerlands and the Crown lands placed them in a bad position. She sighed. Hopefully the men were still as loyal as they had been in the rebellion. But she would not take chances. She pulled a spare piece of parchment towards her and scribbled a response to her grandson. Then she glanced over it once to make sure Willers would understand what she was telling him. Willers. The dates do certainly work. Riverrun is a far superior choice to the ones we had considered. Ned Stark has always been an honorable man. If your sister is happy, I will do as bid. Stay safe. Grandmother. She sealed the scroll quickly and efficiently, then left her room, grabbing her cane as she did so. It tapped lightly on the ground as she shuffled across the castle towards where Lomi's chamber was. She did not even knock on his door before she pushed it open. Maester, I have an urgent scroll that needs sending to Winterfell. He glanced up from the book he was reading and nodded, not daring to comment on her, admittedly slightly rude, entry nor the haste with which she had clearly walked from her chambers. She knew she was breathing heavily and likely looked a bit flustered, and his lack of commentary made him rise, slightly, in her esteem. Of course, Lady Olenna. I will send it now. Did you wish to join me? She nodded. A quick jerk of her head and left the room, waiting for him to follow her. They walked in silence. Once the Maester had carefully tied the scroll to the raven's leg and it was gone and out of sight, she turned to him. How long will it take to arrive? A week. Mayhaps a bit more or less, it depends on the winds. As soon as a response has been received, let me know, she replied. ***. She told Aeleri, rather than Mace. She liked Aeleri. In truth, there were few people she had time for. But Aeleri Hightower was one of them. She had never believed the vapid persona that Aeleri put on in public in her youth, and still did now, in truth. No one was that thick or boring. No one. It was simply not possible. Within moments of truly meeting Aeleri for the first time, rather than just seeing her across a crowded room, she had quickly realized that Aeleri Hightower was not vapid at all. She was shrewd, calculating, and smart. And so, a match had been made. A match that had resulted in 4 intelligent, beautiful, and gifted children. She spent many hours with Aeleri as the children grew up, ostensibly to be with her grandchildren. Which, in part, had been true. But it also meant she spent many hours with Aeleri. Teaching her. Molding her. So that, one day, when Olenna was gone, Aeleri would be able to step up and guide Mace. To help him govern properly and in a way that left everyone thinking that Mace had finally come to his senses, for it was one thing for a mother to override her son, it was another for his wife to do it. And Mace was none the wiser. So, when she told Aeleri what Willers had written to her of, she was unsurprised when Aeleri did not react at first and then, eventually, smiled. He will be a good warden of the South, Aeleri said quietly. He will. That is not why you have brought me here though, Olenna. It is not. What do you need? Something from my father, perhaps. She let a true smile flit over her face for half a second before she schooled it blank and inclined her head. I need you to ask your father and sister to go to the Citadel and find anything and everything that mentions Rhaegar Targaryen. You think the boy might not be a bastard. Rhaegar was many things, a fool being chief amongst them. But he was no rapist. Love makes people foolish, and whilst we cannot be sure what he thought of Lady Lyanna, he may well have thought he loved her, Aeleri replied quietly. Men lose their minds to love. Mayhaps she allowed. Kidnap, I could believe. But, a babe, Aeleri. Women have ways. If Lyanna Stark did not want that babe, it would have died before it lived. As you said, men in love lose their minds, and Lyanna Stark was no fool. If Rhaegar believed he loved her, and she played the game, then any men with her would have been more trusting. She could have done it. She would have found a way. She'd have taken advantage of the opening. You think the Starks are capable of such deception? She snorted. Ned Stark, who hid his sister's son as his own for 6 and 10 years. He lied to his wife. His children. His king. He lied to the whole of Westeros. Right now, Ned Stark has knocked over every piece I have spent the last 6 and 10 years placing on the board. He has, single-handedly, undermined every plan I have made. I have no doubt that his sister was just as smart, their father was certainly a good player. Aeleri squinted slightly at her. Then nodded once. You think they wanted a babe? I do. A true-born babe. Yes. I will do what I can to help, but I worry this is a fool's errand. She smiled. That, Aeleri, is why I am glad that Mace is not yet dead. For if I am wrong, then no harm has been done. If I am right, then our odds of surviving this blasted war just improved, significantly. If Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark were in love, he would have done it properly and she would have demanded it so. He would have wedded her, and he would have wanted any child they have to have true claims, and where better place to hide such secrets. Aeleri, to her credit, did not scowl. She just nodded again, her face blank. What if it was a love match, Lady Olenna? Marriage might not mean she played the game, she may truly have loved Prince Rhaegar. Then she was as foolish as he was. Either way, they are dead, and we need to know if the boy's claim is true. Margaery was to be queen. She tutted. She was. But this is a good choice, still. The wife to King's brother. Her children would be queens or kings one day, I am certain. Jon Snow is both a Stark and a Targaryen, and both houses are known to marry cousins and, as a Stark, he will want to reward those loyal to him, she said. Then she sighed, and if Robb Stark turns out to be a poor husband, I am sure that Jon Snow could be persuaded to take on his late brother's wife as his queen. Aeleri whitened slightly but nodded. Later that evening, she stood by the window of her solar and watched as 3 more ravens left the rookery, their black feathers contrasting beautifully, not that she truly cared in that moment, with the setting sun. It would only take a few days for the ravens to reach their destination and a few more days for the replies to return. Within the week she would have her answer from 2. Then she just had to wait on Willa's reply and on what Lord Lytton and the Mad Maid had found. 298 AC, Jon Snow. She was bigger now. It was only just over 3 weeks since he had first taken to the skies on her back, and she was noticeably bigger. She was still small, far smaller than he thought her ancestors had been. But she was much bigger than she should be, and she would keep growing. He watched as she circled above Greywater Watch. Next to him, Ghost gazed up at her as well. I thought we would find you here, Meera said loudly, her voice cutting through the silence in the courtyard. Hojan, Meera, he replied, pulling his eyes away from Winter to glance at them. He paused. You had another dream. Hojan jerked his head in a nod. He looked pale and tired. In truth, he always did. But after he had a green dream he always looked worse, tired, pale, sickly and exhausted, as though the fate of the world rested on his shoulders. I dreamt of flayed men, stone hands, bears, and giants. They marched towards a great grey direwolf. He froze. Father has summoned the banners. Meera spoke before Hojan could. He must have. Why else would so many bannermen be heading towards Winterfell? I agree. House Mormont, they would not leave Bear Island if it was not urgent, he said. Did you dream of anything else? Father returns, Hojan replied. The moat reinforced, father calling his banners and your father returning so quickly, it can only mean one thing, he said quietly. War, Hojan and Meera said in unison. Then they shared a glance and a grim smile. You will leave at first light. I will speak to the kitchens now and ask they pack food to last you your journey, Meera said. Then without waiting she turned and headed back into the castle. He watched her go. I do not wish to go. We do not wish you to go either, Hojan said quietly. But you cannot escape fate, Jon. If I take her away from here, her growth will slow, he said. She needs to be bigger. She is big enough. You cannot know that. I know it, Ho-jun replied, turning to look at him. She will be fine. He paused, surprised by how confident the boy seemed. You are sure? Yes. He nodded. Very well. Will I see you again? Yes. And Mira? Yes. Very well. I will leave now then. There is no point in delaying until tomorrow, he said. We know. That is why Mira left. She thought she may wish to speak to me privately. So, I should expect her to return with food imminently. Ho-jun smiled. Of course. I suppose I should fly, he said, more to himself than Ho-jun. Down by his side, Ghost let out a small whine. If you leave now, you may arrive only a few days after us, he murmured gently. I will miss you. Ghost let out a loud and playful yip, sending the birds that were sitting on the battlements flying into the air, and launched into a run, sprinting out of the gates of Greywater Watch and into the neck. John watched him go sadly. He had not been away from Ghost since the day the direwolf had been found. Once Ghost was out of sight, he found himself feeling faintly bereft. It was for the best though, Dragonback would be faster, and Ghost would enjoy the run. Ghost has already left, Mira said, coming into his line of vision, a big sack in her arm. Yes. She nodded. Good, he'll arrive only a few days after you should then. He glanced up at the sky, towards Winter, who was flying above the tree line to the north. The sunlight was reflecting of her scales, and he thought that she had never looked more beautiful. Beautiful and strong. She will be fine. She is strong enough for this, Ho-jun said, his voice sure and confident. He turned to glance at his friend. If I did not know better, I would think that your green sight also gave you the ability to read minds. Ho-jun laughed, one of the first times John had ever heard the boy do so, and replied, You are just too obvious. I will miss you both, he said after a few moments' silence. We will see you soon, Ho-jun whispered, his voice sure again but with a soft undertone of nerves. We'll be heading north once father returns. Is something wrong? Ho-jun shared another glance with Mira, who inclined her head slightly. Your brother, Bran, he must go north. North? To Last Hearth? Ho-jun shook his head. Beyond the wall. He froze. He can't walk, even if he has woken up. Mayor Stillowin said he would likely never walk again. How is he meant to go north? And what for? Ho-jun grimaced. I do not know, John. I just know he must, as must I. Did you dream it? Ho-jun jerked his head in a nod. Mira, you will go as well. She nodded, her eyes flinty. I do not like this, he muttered. But your green dreams, you always said they happened for a reason. They told you of me before I arrived, and some of your other dreams have come true. If you say Bran must go north, then I believe you. Will you ask my father for permission? No. We will just leave. He nodded, still feeling uncomfortable. You need soldiers. Men who can fight. The wildlings are dangerous, Ho-jun. More men is a greater risk. Better to move in a smaller group, Mira said, dropping the sack on the floor and gently laying a hand on his arm. Ho-jun believes we will all arrive at the place we must go to safe and alive. He glanced at Ho-jun, who was not looking at him. Liar. Ho-jun was lying to his sister. But Ho-jun would not lead Bran to his death. He knew that about Ho-jun. The boy could not let someone die if he could help it, and if Bran were to die, then he would never have told John. He would not have wanted John to know the fate his brother faced, Ho-jun then. Ho-jun was to die. He did not speak for a moment. Very well. They did not speak for a few moments, each lost in their own thoughts. Eventually Mira withdrew her hand from his arm and grasped the sack again, heaving it up with great effort. Food, paste for your legs and a message for your father are in here, Mira said, breaking the silence that had settled over them and pushing the sack into his arms. We shall see you soon, John. There was a brief pause, then she launched herself around him and wrapped her arms around his waist and up from behind to clench her fingers on his shoulders and muttered, Keep yourself safe. Look after yourself. For us. I will keep Ho-jun safe. I promise. She knew. She knew Ho-jun was lying to her. He couldn't hug her back with the sack in his arms, But he tilted his head closer to her ear and whispered, "Keep yourself safe too." She pulled back and gave him a wan smile. "Go. Until U-298 AC, Aemon Targaryen." "House Martell," he began gently. "They are difficult. The Dornish have always been difficult. But for you, they will be impossibly so. You are a living reminder of what Rhaegar did. You are a living reminder that Rhaenys, Aegon and Elia are dead. I do not say this to be harsh, nephew. But you need to understand that the Dornish actions will be dictated by their anger that you, a child of Lyanna Stark and Rhaegar Targaryen, lived whilst their family died. So, I will not be able to count on Dornish support. No. At best you can expect them to remain neutral, at worst they will actively move against you. They would not side with the Lannisters though, surely. No. But two enemies are worse than one, and you should not underestimate the Lannisters or the Martells. House Martell are intelligent. And I do not simply mean that they are learned. They are sharp, they will exploit every opportunity that they come across. They are vicious, they will move against you in small ways, and they will let you think that you are safe, and they have sought their vengeance, and then they will come for you in the dark. Above all, nephew, they have never forgotten what happened to Elia and her children. Even here, as isolated as we are, we hear whispers. Would a match solve the issue? He laughed. Uncle. Do not laugh at me. You said I should consider a match carefully and not throw it away in a way that will not secure my kingdom. A match with Dorne, it might secure stability. Jon trailed off at the end as though realizing what Aemon already knew. The second that Arianne Martell had a child, whether or not it is yours, she would have you killed. Then the child, that likely wasn't even yours, would sit on that throne. If Daenerys and Viserys were home, they would likely be killed. Your dragon would be killed. House Targaryen would end. But it might be mine. Surely, they would not harm Daenerys or Viserys. It might not, nephew, he said gently. Women have ways and means of ending an unwanted pregnancy and ways of stopping themselves from becoming so. You would be wise to avoid a marriage with anyone with any ties to a house that might wish you harm. And as for your aunt and uncle, I would put nothing past Dorne. They have lost too much to not seek vengeance. Jon laughed bitterly. From the way you speak, uncle, it seems like most houses would wish me harm. He smiled sadly at Jon. Yes. They would. So, Dorne will be a problem. Jon said after a few moments had passed. What if I offered them independence and the promise that the kingdoms would never turn on them? And when the other 6 kingdoms ask for the same? He asked, leaning forward, and resting his elbow on his desk so he could rest his head on his hand. I say no. But you have already offered it to Dorne. You cannot then say no to others who asks, you will have riots on your hands, nephew. Jon scowled at him and then leaned back against the wall behind the bed. His feet kicked irritably, and he ran his hands through Ghost's fur. So, what do I offer Dorne? He asked after a few moments. I cannot offer them a child on the throne. I cannot give them independence. If I have nothing to offer them, then they will never be placated. It is exactly that, nephew. You have nothing they want. So, what do I do? You wait for them to come to you. They will come, eventually. You do not think I should go to them? No. You would be wise not to risk yourself by stepping into Dorne. You speak as though they would see me dead in a heartbeat. You cannot know that, uncle. He sighed and leaned back in his chair. His eyes flicked to the dragon in the fireplace who was curled up in a ball on the logs, the flames flickering around her. She looked up, as though sensing his attention was on her. Then, clearly realizing nothing of interest was happening, went back to sleep. I would not have you risk yourself, he said eventually. You want to think the best of people, Jon. It is your biggest weakness. Not everyone is like they are in the north, people are liars and schemers and manipulators. Much of Westeros holds no love for House Targaryen, and those that do will think that your claim is not true. She helps. But she is not enough. You cannot just fight them on the field, nephew. You must fight them everywhere. You must expect knives in the dark. Mayhaps I would be better off leaving for Essos, Jon said eventually, closing his eyes and turning his head towards the fireplace. You are no coward, nephew. We both know you will not do that. You will take the throne, eventually. Whether you wish to is, of course, another matter. So, do I wait for everyone, uncle? Or do only wait for the Dornish? There are times you must wait for people to come to you and times you must go to them. How will I know when I should do which? Go to your allies, those you trust and those who would never harm you. Wait for everyone else to come to you. Never give them an advantage by putting yourself where they wish you to be. Chapter 16, Matches. Chapter Text. Chapter Summary, Theon makes his choice and Sansa proposes a match. Jon returns to Winterfell and learns that Robb has a new favorite phrase. In our interlude, Aemon and Jon discuss House Tyrell. Notes: the eagle-eyed amongst you will have noted that another new story was uploaded today. KB, alongside Perennial and UTW, will continue to take precedence over that one. I estimate I have another 10 to 15 chapters on Perennial, another 15-20-ish, here and another 15-ish, on UTW. The next chapter for this story and the next two for Perennial are already written and I hope to have them up in the next fortnight, editing depending. 298 AC, Eddard Stark. He had spent a good few days watching Theon closely after he had spoken to the lad. Eventually, he decided he could wait no longer. Jon would be back soon, and the banners were marching to Winterfell. He had to find out what choice Theon had made so he knew what to do with the boy in the coming moons. Theon looked less nervous than he did before when Ned asked the boy to meet him in his solar that morning. He was still not striding as confidently as he had done before, but some of his swagger had returned. Once the door was shut, he gestured for Theon to take the chair in front of his desk and then took his own seat in the one behind it. Then he poured them both 2 generous servings of ale and surveyed Theon as they drank deeply from their goblets. "We spoke before, Theon, about your father, about your family," he began gently, trying not to frighten the boy. "About the sort of man you are to become. I remember, Lord Stark. I wondered if you had given my comments any thought. I do not wish to press you, but war is brewing in the south. You will have heard from Robb that I have summoned my banners. I must know your decision before we march." "My father," Theon said. Then the boy flushed and coughed slightly. He reached across the desk and poured another slosh of ale into Theon's goblet and let the boy take a deep swig before he filled it up again. "My father," Theon began again. "I don't remember him. The cloak my father may have swaddled me in might have borne the kraken, but I do not remember. I had thought that one day, I would return. That he would welcome me with open arms. But now you think otherwise." Theon glanced up at him, his brows furrowed and his eyes sad. "I do not think he would recognize me. I have not paid the iron price for anything I have done. I do not remember how to sail. I do not remember Pike. I do not remember what my father looks like. I do not remember what my mother looks like. Or what my brothers were like. Or my sister." He gave Theon a sad smile and said quietly, "I do not fully remember my brother or sister either. Sometimes, I think I remember them completely. And then the next day I wonder if I had dreamed it. But there are bits I shall never forget." Theon's eyes flashed with sympathy for a moment and then the boy turned his gaze away slightly and said, "Do you miss them?" "Every day," he replied. "Just because I do not remember them completely it does not diminish my love for them. I do not know if I love my father, or my mother, or my sister," Theon said quietly, his eyes fixed on his lap. He looked so young, far younger than his 20 name days, that Ned felt, for a moment, like mayhaps in many ways Theon was much younger in terms of development than Robb or Jon. "How can I love them if I cannot remember them?" He leaned back against his chair and sighed quietly. "Do you remember anything?" Theon jerked his head in a nod but did not reply. "Then, I suppose, the question is, do you love what you remember?" "Yes. But what if they are things I have imagined, like you do with your brother and sister? I suppose you must decide if the bits you always remember feel real enough for you to love them," he said gently. "They will always be your family, Theon. I would never ask you to turn your back on them." Theon gave him a wry smile and a small smirk flickered across his lips for a moment as he straightened in his chair and replied, "They would ask me to stab you in the back the moment you turned away from me." "I suppose House Stark and House Greyjoy are very different," he mused. "Like night and day," Theon muttered. They settled into silence and Ned watched as Theon stared into space. "House Stark," Theon said after several minutes had passed. "I have not always been treated like family, but I understand why, and you have still treated me as part of your family more than you needed to. I have sometimes thought that mayhaps, you did not care for me as your own. And you did not. But how could you? You might have had to take my head at any moment, and only a fool would grow to love a boy that he might have to kill at a moment's notice, like a son. And you are no fool, Lord Stark.